Yeah, sounds cool. Sounds cool. Okay, we'll get started. All right, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. It is July 7th, 2025. Hope everyone had a good Independence Day. I've just got a couple of announcements, and then we'll ask for public comment on items on our agenda or not on our agenda. And I'll also ask Chris if he's got anything to comment on up front. The first thing I want to just recognize is I got word that a longtime city council member from multiple terms, Peggy Gagan, died recently. She represented Ward 1 for many, many years, very active in efforts to get our public library built. And we appreciate her service and remember her and her family in these days. When we get to public discussion or council discussion at the end, I would request that we just have a brief conversation about events that occurred in Texas and how that might be relevant to Billings, in particular, whether we should ask our Disaster Emergency Services Coordinator, Derek Yeager, to stop by, talk to us a little bit about lessons we can learn and notification procedures here in Billings. But let's not get into that now. I just don't want to forget about that when we get to that item. And then lastly, we did have a request from Councilmember Bill Kennedy on item number 4 to move that. That was put on the agenda at his request, litter in Billings, that discussion. And he's not able to be with us tonight, and since that was his request. Debbie is the presenter on that, but she's not available in the next work session here in July. So that has been tentatively added to the August 4th first work session in August. But we will need a motion to clarify if that's the desire of the rest of the council. So with that, Chris, anything?
Yeah, two things. First, I'd ask you to really work hard at talking into the mics. We are testing various AI tools that if we can get the right tool, the minutes for these meetings and regular meetings, could literally go from taking equal time of a meeting down to a much more efficient process. But one of the keys is it's got to pick up voices. So if you didn't have enough incentives before to try to lean into the mic, please think about how much more efficient we can be producing minutes for your meetings using AI to do that. So that's a reminder there. And then secondly was just a compliment and a thank you to the Heights for hosting, I thought, a fantastic 4th of July event at Castle Rock Park. So for the 3 or 4 hours my family was there, it just was a really nice event and seemed to go well. In speaking with both chiefs today, thankfully, we did not have any tragedies like apparently there was one up in Great Falls, so very unfortunate for them. So Great Falls is out asking about what other cities are doing in Montana, and our limited knowledge is they may be the only ones of the larger cities in the state that are still allowing a time frame for fireworks in town. But they're kind of questioning that with the events. I think there was a loss of life, and so that question's being asked. So Kevin and I touched base with both Chief St. John and Chief Hopple. Both, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to enforce. We know they're being sold all over just outside the city limits and that issue. But this year, there weren't anything out of the ordinary to report to you this year from prior years. So that's it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for bringing up the microphones. I did watch the Community 7 TV broadcast of our June 16th work session or parts of that, and I noticed that it was very, very difficult to hear council members speaking, even with the volume on my turned up to 100%. These round mics were much better. So we'll see whether that we can change that. I would just encourage everybody, and that was across the board, all council members. But I think we need to think in terms of like a tennis ball, not a basketball or a large watermelon or turning your heads like this. And that may make a difference. We'll see whether what kind of impact that can have. So, okay, with that, then we'll get on to public comment on all items. There will be an opportunity for public comment toward the end of each of these items when we get there. But if you'd like to comment on any of them now because you've got to leave, you're more than welcome to do that. So please, I see a distinguished visitor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Denise Joy, 1600 Avenue E, number 10, Billings 59102. I'm here to make some comments that are not meant as criticism, but as encouragement for us as local leaders and as state leaders to address the issue of unhomed people. It's very apparent during the summertime. It is apparent during the wintertime. We are not seeming to address this in a way that is effective. There are a lot of constraints. Municipalities are not the place to have the solution for everything that comes from the unhomed. The state is not the only solution to how we deal with the issue of the unhomed. It's very apparent that we have many people who are sleeping and living in their cars. They have a job. The narrative that you need to get a job if you need a home isn't helpful when there are so many working poor who have no home. They're living in their cars. They park in their cars around the park. You can see them. You can ask them. They're unhomed. So I know that at council, while I was on, we had a committee that was looking into some solutions that had stakeholders across the city and the county. I would really offer my assistance as a representative to bring forward something that would help us to best address this. And if that takes maybe council getting interested in what that committee found and if there were any solutions, if it means that that we go back or look at some of the proposals that were put forward from the Salvation Army. That project apparently did not come through. There have been projects and they haven't come to fruition. There's a very large development, as you all know, that is sponsored by a very wealthy corporation. And within a very short distance of that development, there's a woman who is more than 70 years old with a walker and a small dog sleeping under a boulevard tree every night. That really isn't a thing that we should ignore or that should become common or that we somehow feel like, well, if she got a job, she could get housing. There are people in this city who work 2 jobs, and they are still not really able to afford housing. So if the council, I'm free and available, please reach out to me with anything that I could do to help. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, former council member Joy, for your service in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Montana House of Representatives in the last session. Appreciate your efforts there. Any other public comment? Go ahead.
Yes, Mayor and Council. Tony O'Donnell, 3958 South Tanager, Billings. I heard you discussing a little bit before the meeting about the PSC announced a 4% rate increase, so I immediately got on the phone to check that out. From what I was told, it's a very complicated matter in 20 seconds. What I was told is that Northwestern had self-imposed an 18% rate increase, which they dropped down to 4%. So 4% increase is from what it was from 2024 rates, but it's not 18%.
Thank you for that clarification. Other members of the public at this point, is there any other public comment? Any other public comment? Before I close the public comment period at this point? No one's coming forward, no one's standing up, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment period, move on to our very first item, which Jerry Armstrong, I think, or Debbie, okay, is going to kick us off. So Debbie.
I'm only kicking off to introduce you to Sherry Armstrong because she hasn't been here. As most of you know, we had 3 of 6 division managers in Public Works openings this year. She graciously agreed to fill one of them. And so she comes to us from Colorado Springs, brings a lot of information that we are picking her brain every day, and we're really lucky to have her. But just wanted to introduce Sherry to you, and then she's going to kind of introduce the rest.
Welcome, Sherry.
I'm glad to be here. I guess it's working. So we have Roger Hoogerhide and Brianna Pabst. Roger's a project manager with the EPA, and Brianna's with DEQ as a project manager for the EPA Superfund site. And they're just going to give us an update on where we're at with that.
Roger, it's all yours. If you can figure out how to turn on the microphone.
All right, my name's Roger Hoogerheide. I live at 1773 Carmen Road, Helena, Montana, and I'm the project manager for the Billings PCE site. So this is an update to the meeting we had in January. EPA and DEQ are about ready to release what is called a proposed plan. So we've evaluated various alternatives to address the indoor air contamination that results from the dry cleaning releases throughout the city of Billings. And it's going to be released to the public sometime in July. I don't have a date certain. As part of the release of the proposed plan, we are required to allow a public comment period for no less than 30 days. And we're also going to have a public meeting. A fact sheet will be distributed, I would probably say in 2 weeks, that would announce the public meeting date. It will be at 5:30 at the city library. I just don't know what the date is at this point. So the preferred alternative that DEQ and EPA have determined is appropriate is, for ease of terms, installation of radon mitigation systems into homes and businesses that have levels either in the indoor air or underneath the foundation. As part of the briefing package, there was a map, which I also distributed in January as well. That map hasn't changed. So the plume underlies 4,200 structures, of which we've determined in Area A, there's 700 residential, 20 commercial. In that particular area, it starts at 8th and Central. So it goes to Central, to Division, to, I want to say Clark, and then kind of steps down back to 8th and Central. There are 700 residential properties, structures in there that are eligible for a radon mitigation system. So that's one part of the remedy. The other part of the remedy is the additional 3,500 structures that underlie the groundwater plume are eligible to get sampled. So we're going to do significant outreach to try to reach those people. And then the third thing, which we talked about in January and the city agreed, we're going to do non-engineered instruments. And in this instance, we talked to the city about the possibility of whether or not they would entertain ordinances. And I walked away from that meeting that the city council was in agreement that they were willing to work with EPA and DEQ on the ordinances. So while I'm on the ordinances, how I see the timeline working is EPA and DEQ will kind of hash out language until we're satisfied with that. I would like, as part of this meeting, for the city to identify a point person that we could work with. Hopefully it'll be Sherry. But we also would need a city attorney involved before it could come to the city council for voting and ultimately adoption. So with that, I would like to hear feedback from the council as to how you guys want to work with EPA and DEQ on that.
Great. Roger, you want us to discuss that before anybody else or wait for the end to talk about that?
I don't necessarily know how the meetings work, so whatever works for you.
You know, I don't know if Bran has any other presentation. Why don't we come back to that, and then we won't break it up. But we'll be sure to come back to your question about ordinances and working with you. If that's okay, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just add, so I'm Brianna Pabst. I'm with the DEQ. DEQ has worked really closely with EPA throughout the process of developing the proposed plan. So we've worked to kind of implement some things as far as the state perspective into these mitigation systems. So I think the plan that we're releasing, it's something that we both worked together on, and just really trying to get the word out to the public to get involvement and hear feedback from what the public thinks on the next steps.
Great.
I have one other thing that I want to at least bring to the council and the mayor's attention. Over the past couple of years, we've brought in what's called a trace atmospheric gas analyzer. It's basically a mobile lab that we use to basically collect samples real time. Over the past couple of years, I had a contractor in Billings, AECOM, and we were able to use their facility for storage and then also to run the samples at night. Because of where we are in the process and with the cuts to the government, basically EPA's contracting staff is no more. So I'm not very confident that I'm going to have a contractor on board in Billings to help support me when this bus comes in the winter. It says winter of 2025 on the thing, but it's probably will start in January of 2026, where we would probably sample anywhere between 80 and 100 homes. What I would like, if I cannot get a contractor, is I would like to see whether or not the city of Billings would allow us to be able to park the bus in the evening on a city lot. We would need some electricity to the bus to allow us to do the samples. And that is my other ask coming out of this meeting. And with that, I have no other things to discuss, and I'm open for questions.
Great. Thank you. Sherry, anything that you want to add to that discussion? Okay. So let's make sure we get to Roger's specific questions. Let's start with the easy one. I don't think anybody have any problem with their parking a bus on city property. No. So work with whoever at the city. I don't know if that's Public Works or Sherry to find a location of electricity that is a good location.
Yeah, as I had Boris as my point of contact before. Is it okay that Sherry becomes EPA and DEQ's point of contact for the site?
You know, it's ultimately up to Sherry's powers that be, not the city council. We don't direct staff, but I don't see any reason why the city council would have any objection to that. And I'm looking around and seeing a lot of nodding heads. So we'll assume that between Debbie and the city administrator, you'll work that out. And then the city attorney, Gina Dahl, is behind you. And so you can work with her to get somebody assigned from the city attorney's office on that end.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, 2 down, 1 more to go. You raised the issue of city ordinances. Can you tell us exactly better what that would require? I assume neither EPA, DEQ, or the city is looking to require mandatory installation of the mitigation systems or mandatory testing, but I could be wrong. What exactly would you envision that the ordinances would say?
All right, so, and jump in here, Brianna, okay? So I envision three ordinances. One for that Area A that I talked about from 8th and Central to Division. Any new constructions would require a mitigation system be installed as part of it. So it would be more how I've seen that area over the past couple of years is the homes are older and people buy them as investment properties. They raise the old building, kind of build like a fourplex or something, and then rent it out. So in that instance, we would require that a mitigation system gets put in place. Working with EPA, I'm not asking that the owner would be responsible for that. We just want to make sure that the installation is in. So that's the first ordinance. The second ordinance is if there's a land use change in area, and it's just area A, right? So there's 20 commercial structures in there, so we're not talking a lot. But if one of those structures were to go from commercial to residential, we would, and that in all likelihood would require a permit to the city, if I'm correct, and a major renovation. So in that instance, we would want to work with the developer to be able to put a mitigation system in. And the third one, this was actually a council member had brought this to our attention in January. They wanted a process where, because the Area A has a lot of rentals, they wanted a process in place where a tenant would be notified. So if they enter into a lease with an owner, that the tenant would be notified of potential environmental contamination and any sampling and mitigation that has been done. I see that last one as probably being informational and non-enforceable. Because I don't want to put the burden on the city to have to be able to enforce that last one.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We do have a representative from Billings Association of Realtors with us who may want to weigh in on that at some point during our public comment period as well. So thank you for that clarification. Roger, I will just kick it back to council. Questions, general discussion, and we'll open up for public comment on it. So again, to those three ordinances that we're being asked for input on, requiring new construction in only Area A to install mitigation systems financed by EPA dollars. Second, if there's a change in use from commercial to residential in Area A, similarly, they would have to install the mitigation system. And then lastly, that notice to tenants in Area A of past testing and possible environmental issues. So council, what's your pleasure? I don't know that it's binding on us now, but this is a work session and they could use any of their help that they can get. Councilor Bernice?
I do have a question as to what was just talked about, but I also wanted to first ask about the, you're going to have a public comment session in the library. Can we ask that it not be on a night a council meeting is happening? Because I would like to be able to attend that meeting. And I'm sure other council members would too. So, and I'm assuming you're going to have a lot of people at that meeting.
Yeah, I'll be happy to look at the calendar and you make sure before we finalize the date.
Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned within these ordinances, you briefly mentioned that these mitigation issues or these mitigation equipment, it's not necessarily going to be required for them to, the landowner to pay for it. Is EPA paying for that in Area A in all cases?
I'm going to say yes. My attorney may advise me otherwise.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be clear about. So that would be, if we're doing these ordinances, the landowners, there's no excuse for them not to put those in for their tenants to make sure that this mitigation is done. So disclosure of it would be like any other rental disclosure is this has been mitigated and you can choose to live here or not, but the mitigation has been taken care of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Other questions, comments? Councilmember Rowan, Councilmember Boyette?
Now you're on.
This is on? Okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding fully. So you're going to be addressing mitigation in Area A and monitoring in areas B and C?
And if the results are, so we have a cleanup level that we're going to present to the public in the proposed plan. So if they exceed that cleanup level, they would be eligible for a mitigation system.
Okay, so there's retrofitting involved, is what you're saying?
Yes.
And what if people have already installed a radon system? Can they be reimbursed?
They cannot be reimbursed, but what we would do is we would work with that property owner to take over operation and maintenance. So if a fan were to break or a motor, it would be the government's responsibility to replace it.
Okay, and understanding that Congress is always a question mark, do you currently have funding? I see the numbers in our staff memo here of over 30 million over an extended period of time. Do you have about $1 million a year right now to address this?
I do not, but I'm fairly confident that I'm going to get it just because funding prioritizes human health over ecological risk. And this clearly is a human health issue.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Councilor Boyette?
Thank you, Mike.
You were. Now
Put
you're
on
on.
now.
There you go. Yep.
So do you have a list, Roger, of all the people who live in Area 1 so that you're going to send them a notice to say, show up at the library? Question.
Fact sheet, yeah.
Everybody, I mean, you have that list already?
We have the mailer will go out to everybody that's within that boundary right there, plus like the mayor would get a fact sheet, the representatives, state representatives, as well as federal representatives. So it's going to go out to, if I'm not mistaken, 4,500 people.
So, and one last question. Is Area A going to stay Area A? Will it grow? Will it get bigger? How do you look at this? Plume just can't sit in one place. Does it move?
The intent is, and I was trying to, in the interest of time, I wasn't going to bring it up, but in the upcoming timeline, so the main source is on 7th and Central. And Brianna and I are currently working on alternatives to address that source. Basically, what that would do is cut the head off of the snake. And then once it's no longer sourcing, the plume that had migrated beyond that location should, I guess, dilute or, be reduced over time. But we would continue to monitor it. But the plume will continue to expand until it reaches the Yellowstone River. That will be the defining boundary where it can no longer expand. Go ahead.
That's why we have the additional sampling outside of Area A, so we can continue to sample and monitor if it is growing beyond where we know the source to be.
Roger, I'll ask you a question. And Brianna, the Bozeman Sullivan site, the PCE leaked out of clay pipes at junctions along the city right of way. Do you have any reason to think that the city has problems in that regard, or is that not a concern here in Billings?
We have not identified the city as a responsible party like at Bozeman Solvents, no.
Okay, God bless you.
Yeah.
Other questions, Councilmember Denise?
Thank you. Since you mentioned this inevitably is going to go to the Yellowstone River, do you have a defined path in which this may progress over 30 years?
We haven't done that modeling yet, but I do have a contractor in place that is going to take all of the information that we've been collecting over the past couple of years, kind of crunch it, and we could have them look at kind of the migration of the plume and see when we would see it. But, given that the Yellowstone River flows at rates of 10 to 100 cubic feet per second, if not 1,000, and the input from the groundwater is probably a gallon per minute, we're not going to see it in the Yellowstone River. I have the Lockwood Solvent site where it has reached the Yellowstone River, and we've never been able to detect it in the river.
Okay, thank you. And how long will that modeling take before the public? can
I'm
see it?
hopeful that the model may be done sometime in 2026.
All right, thank you.
Roger, I'm just going to take the risk and comment that we haven't heard any objection to the 3 proposed ordinances. You shouldn't take that as a guaranteed approval, but I guess what I'm hearing is that if you can take the responsibility, go ahead and putting together language that we will gladly take a look at it. Speaking personally, those things all make sense to me. So I don't know that, at least personally, I would have any objection to that. I'm not hearing any objection, but there may be some desires to tweak language or make some other changes. But council, I don't want them to be misled. So if anybody has any particular concerns, recognizing you're not bound by anything we say or don't say tonight, feel free to do so. A lot of shrugging going on here, so I think that's a good sign for you. Okay. Okay, let's, before we wrap up the conversation, let's open up for public comment and see if there's anybody in the audience who would like to comment more specifically now that they've heard this discussion. So this is an opportunity for public comment on item number 1. If you came here tonight and would like to comment, please do so. We just ask that you introduce yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes if possible. Elizabeth.
Hello, good evening. Elizabeth Shoemaker. I am a realtor, so you all know if you have questions on that. And then I'm also the representing the Home Builders Association as the government affairs officer. So I deal kind of on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to purchasing, selling properties, and then also building them. So I would say the 3 ordinances seem reasonable to me. I definitely think that, I mean, as realtors, we definitely do, have to disclose the plume. And, but, most agents, I think, do that. I would say as far as the tenants go, that would be the one thing that I would definitely agree with for sure is to have have it be a required disclosure. I know that the one thing I will say is that commercial property is considered anything as far as apartments 4 units and up. So you might want to clarify that those commercial buildings are also need to be included in that disclosure. That and I also personally know somebody who struggled with some of the negative effects of the plume, who was a commercial tenant. And so I would say, personally, I think that, technically, commercial sellers are not required to have a property disclosure, but maybe we should encourage that in some kind of way to just let people know that when they are purchasing those properties that they do have that flaw. And so just my 2 cents as from what I do. And then also just if we could communicate on the process for the installation. I'm sure you guys will, you do a good job at that, but we want to work with you as far as the home builders, if they were to be building in that area, what they could do to get funding for those systems. I think they're around like $1,500 approximately. So if they were to be covered, is there an application process for them to go through? We would just want to be informed of that so that we could get that information out to the builders who are building in those areas. So yeah, I think that's really all the points I had to make. If anybody has questions about the realtor disclosure side of things, I'm available for that.
I do want to say post-ROD, I want to work with both the realtors as well as the financial institutes because commercial properties are getting flagged by the financial institutes. I want to make sure that when a property does go up for sale and I get contacted within a reasonable time, that I'm able to go out and collect samples on behalf of the seller as well as the buyer, so that the information is there and it will be more transparent that way. So I do want to work with the realtor community once we have a record of a decision
Yeah,
in
we
place.
would appreciate that very much. So we'll definitely be in touch on that. So thank
Okay.
you.
Very good, thank you. Any other public comment on item number 1? Any other public comment on item number 1? Before we close public comment period, no one is standing up, no one's coming forward, so we close the public comment period. Roger, one last question, at least for me. Can you tell us how long the mitigation process is likely to go on, and also how long is the mitigation system likely to last? I have a radon mitigation system, which, as far as I know, is working as well as the day it was installed. Which is now going on close to 30 years. So they seem to be very low maintenance. But can you comment on that long-term issue?
So when it says the 30 plus million, we estimated it would be a 35-year time frame. Brianna and I, when we looked at costs, we didn't feel 100% of the owners are going to allow us access. We felt only 60% were. And the reason why we did the 35 years is we felt that properties would turn over time. So let's say somebody in Area A owns a residential property and doesn't allow EPA or the state access to be able to install the system. What we would do is put a deed notice on that particular property such that should it be sold, there's a notice on the property informing the buyer as well as the financial institute that EPA tried to install the system but were denied access. We feel that the deed notice in and of itself will probably incentivize people, but we still had to I am the government, and me putting a system in and say, oh, by the way, I want to come in periodically to make sure it's working. There's people that would probably say, yeah, they're probably monitoring me and they're downloading information. So there are going to be people who just mistrust the federal government for one reason or another that we're just going to have a very difficult time trying to get access. So 35 years is what we estimate.
The longevity of those systems. So with that 35 years, we're assuming that we would do periodic maintenance inspections. I think we're planning for once every 8 years, and that would just be checking to make sure that the pressure differential is still as it should be, the fans are still functioning. So we would be including operation and maintenance in that 35 years. And that time frame is also assuming that we are going to be cleaning up the source area. So once we've cleaned up the source area, it would negate needing a mitigation system to address indoor air.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anything further? Councilmember Neese?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned you're going to clean up the source area, cut the head off the snake. I'm assuming you're taking a lot of soil out. And then if so, what's happened to all this contaminated material?
So for the most part, and I don't know how long you've been a council member, but there was an action that took place, I want to say in 2007, 2008 timeframe, where 3,000 tons of soil were basically all the accessible soil was taken out. So what we're dealing with, because this particular type of contamination is called it's denser than water. So as soon as it gets into the environment, it's going to basically sink until it hits either an impervious clay layer or bedrock. So most of the contamination right now is in the groundwater, not the soil itself. But should we sample for, or should we excavate soils, there are RCRA disposal requirements, RCRA being the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, that says if it exceeds this, it has to go to a hazardous waste facility. But if it's below that, it could go to a solid waste facility. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Very good. Anything else, Chris?
Just say we will move forward, Sherry and staff working with them on 1, 2, 3 here to bring them back to you. The mayor mentioned it. Yeah, I spent 13 years working on a more intensive site than this one, and in the beginning, I was very concerned about how disruptive this would be and how homeowners would respond. And I was very surprised, frankly, how well it went relative to not being overly expensive, going smoothly, and transactions continuing to happen over and over and over on the sale of those homes and commercial properties without this disrupting the kind of economic viability of the area. So no guarantees for us, but it was not nearly as impactful as I anticipated it was, and would encourage anyone to please work with you because it's not a real technical system, as the mayor said. Easy to operate, doesn't cost much, and is good for our health. So we will work with them in this regard and move forward.
Okay, very good. If there's nothing else from the council or from our staff or our guests, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks for being with us. You bet. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Councilor Asselmeyer reminded me that I had not come back to item number 4 to ask the council what you want to do about that. So, Councilor Asselmeyer, would you like to make a motion in that regard?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd move to remove agenda item number 4, litter and Billings discussion from tonight's agenda and postpone it to an August agenda as determined by staff.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Neese. Any discussion? Any discussion before we vote? Okay, motion is move it to August 4th work session. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Somebody tell Debbie her work here is done, if she would like it to be. Then brings us up to item number 2, our transportation alternatives applications. Elise.
For having me today. Hopefully this is close enough. I might need some help moving. Is it 2 screens, or how do I get the presentation onto? How do I get the presentation onto the correct screen? Okay. Okay, let's see if we've got this. It's thinking. Okay. Let's see, hopefully I can put this in presentation mode for you all. It's in presentation. Okay, there we go. Alrighty, well, thank you. Thanks, Mayor and Council, for having me here tonight. I'm here to talk about the 2025 Transportation Alternatives Program. Tonight is just a presentation, and then we will be bringing it back to you for a vote on your consent agenda on Monday. So the background for the Transportation Alternatives Grant, it's a federal grant that flows through the Montana Department of Transportation, MDT. This year, as in 2023, the funding has been directly allocated to the metropolitan planning organizations where those exist in Montana, including in Billings. I think this is a really fortunate thing for us because in the past we had to compete with everybody from across the state to get access to this funding. Now the funding is coming directly to our urbanized area. The urbanized areas, as we say, an area larger than the city but smaller than the county. We have about $1.8 million to allocate, a little under that. Entities that could apply were cities, counties, and tribal entities. Nonprofits could not apply as the primary. They had to have a local government sponsor. And we did receive 2 applications, one from the city of Billings and one from Yellowstone County for this funding. And the funding request that we received is under the amount that we've been allocated. So we are able to fund both of these applications if that's what the Policy Coordinating Committee recommends. And with all of our transportation planning processes, so next week we'll be asking you to forward a recommendation to the Policy Coordinating Committee where you have a representative. The mayor represents you, as does the county commissioners are represented, the planning board is represented, as is the Montana Department of Transportation. So the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP process, it is a local review process. So we review the applications locally. The scoring was done by the Technical Advisory Committee a couple of weeks ago. And then the recommendations, after they're approved locally at our Policy Coordinating Committee, are forwarded on to MDT. The default for these projects is for the local entity to administer the project under the Montana Department of Transportation LAG, or Local Agency Guidelines Program, which is also a really fortunate thing for us, I think. So it would be either the city public works or county public works would help administer those, which helps streamline some things. So those projects have to have a local match of 13.42%. And we did include instructions on how to develop the budget in the TA instructions. These were the 5 categories that were used to score the 2 applications. As you can see, the first 2 are just yes, no. The last 3 are the ones that the Technical Advisory Committee used to review the applications. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the 2 applications that we received. The first one was from the city of Billings, and it was for a suite of Safe Routes to School projects. The Technical Advisory Committee gave their scores, and the average score was 86.72. The project includes 7 project focus areas that are recommended in the Safe Routes to School plan. So these came directly from those approved plans, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. There's the Jackson Street pedestrian crossings and curb extensions, Riverside School Zone improvements, the South Billings Boulevard School Crossing and Pedestrian Refuge Island, Governor's Boulevard intersection improvements for Castle Rock School, the Central Avenue and 24th Street West high visibility crossing and leading pedestrian interval, Park Hill Drive and 17th Street West doing a high visibility crossing there, and then Poly Drive and Hoover Avenue pedestrian crossing doing a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which is one of those pedestrian activated beacons, and curb extensions. And that last project would benefit Poly Drive Elementary. So the project cost is just under $1.5 million. The request that the city made to the federal TA program was just under $1.3 million, and the city will be matching with about $200,000 that would come from the annual Safe Routes to School allocation. So I'm going to go through, sorry, this is a little small to see, but these are the maps for the various projects. So this is the map for both the Jackson Street pedestrian crossing and curb extensions, the Riverside School Zone improvements, and the South Billings Boulevard School Crossing and Pedestrian Refuge Island. This is the one benefiting Castle Rock for Governor's Boulevard intersection improvements. This is the Central Avenue and 24th Street West high visibility crossing and leading pedestrian interval. And then I think this is the final one. So there's the Park Hill and 17th, the high visibility crossing, and then the Poly Drive and Hoover Avenue crossing with the rectangular rapid flashing beacon and the curb extensions. So that was all of the city's suite of projects. And then the second application we received was from Yellowstone County. It was submitted by the Lockwood Pedestrian Safety District, which exists as an entity under Yellowstone County. And it was for the Johnson Lake Sidewalk Connector Project. They had an average score from the Technical Advisory Committee of 87.2. The project includes two sidewalk gaps of approximately 500 feet of sidewalk on Johnson Lane from Silverton Street to Old Hardin Road. The project cost is just about $250,000. They're requesting $217,000 from the federal TA funds and providing local matching funds of $33,600. I do want to note that the commissioners did provide a letter of support for this project. And then this is their kind of map and conceptual design, just filling in those two sections of sidewalk there. Okay, so that's kind of all I have about the two projects. I know Mac is here if there are any questions about the city's project. So the Technical Advisory Committee and the Planning Board have both recommended full funding for both of these projects. So at your July 14th meeting, we would be asking you to forward a recommendation of approval for funding both of these projects to the Policy Coordinating Committee. So with that, I can take any questions.
Questions for Elise? Councilmember Denise and Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Elise, this may not be something that we're involved in, but you mentioned some county properties here, so I'm asking you, because we have several county properties within the city, and I'm thinking of a couple, at least one here in Lake Elmo where it's a county property and there's no sidewalk, so people actually have to walk out in the street to get by this property. Is that ever brought to the county to let them know that this is county property? It's causing, dangerous situations on Lake Elmo where people having to walk in the street to get around.
Thank you, Councilmember Nice, for your question. I think what makes the Lockwood application different is that they voted to tax themselves to implement these projects, and so they have that local funding for the match. I know sometimes we talk with the county about things about, different sidewalks and things. The one on Barrett Road comes to mind. But as I said, that would be a slightly different conversation because there's already this existing pot of money that the Lockwood Pedestrian Safety District can use as their match. If there were other things, the county would have to come up with that match and then also provide the maintenance as well for those sections.
But could the property owner come up with a match? I mean,
It could, yeah.
Assuming, so this is really, it's going to benefit the property owner to participate in something like that because it's going to be less for them to do it with a match versus not having the match at all.
Sure. Yeah, that would be, and I think Laura maybe wants to add something.
I was just going to say, thank you for letting us be aware of that. We can bring that to the county and say, hey, you have a missing piece of sidewalk here. Just put it on their radar. Let Monica know down in County Public Works that there is a section that that could be an issue there, but we will definitely discuss it with them.
Okay, and speaking of Barrett Road, because you brought that up, that's another area. Do the property owners know that something like this could be a match program where it wouldn't cost as much as it would just be to put in the sidewalk themselves?
I'm not aware that they're aware of this program. We do public outreach when we announce the use of these funds. The county could sponsor an application as long as the local match could be donated by the property owners to the county to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Elise, I'm not even sure I should ask this. We've got two county projects here where we're going to use transportation alternative plan or program funds to build those sidewalks, minus the 13% matching. we also have all these sidewalk projects in the city that we do every year. A lot of them justified by safe routes to school kind of programs. Why, how do we justify to private property owners in the city that they're being assessed for their sidewalks when out in the county, they're being assessed for like 10% of the sidewalks? And I'm not sure that I would change that approach, but I'm just wondering how we justify it.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Epps, for your question. I think it, and maybe somebody else, this is a little beyond my scope of expertise, but I think maybe what the county would say about the Lockwood Pedestrian Safety District is they are paying into that fund every year for those sidewalks. So even though it's not necessarily coming from the property owner that they have to put in their whole sidewalk, they're putting something into that fund. But I would certainly turn it over to anybody else from planning who would like to jump in and say more. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Just for the record, the property owner on Johnson Lane here is really cutting a fat hog. If that property were in city and they were going to develop a property, we would just say put in the sidewalk and they'd pay 100% of that. In this case, the most they're putting in is some small portion of the SID in the whole district, pennies on the dollar, and they're getting a $250,000 sidewalk basically for free. Just to get the facts, that is the facts, right? It'd be nice if there was some compromise in the middle where the property owner that would be so benefited by this would have to contribute more. That's an observation, not really a question, I guess, but feel free to disagree with that if you want.
Thank you, Mayor.
No disagreement. Okay. All right. Other questions before we open for public comment? Okay. Thank you very much. This is an opportunity for public comment. So if anybody would like to comment on item number 2, the 2 transportation alternative applications, this is your opportunity. Is there any public comment on item number 2? Any public comment? No one's standing up, no one's coming forward, so we will close the public comment period for item number 2. Council, no decision is required from us. It'll be on a consent agenda. Is there anything else in the way of commentary before we move on to the next item? Seeing nothing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item up then is our draft public art policy. And Elise doesn't even have to move. So
yes,
back
that's
to
also me.
you, and joining her is our planning director, Wyeth Friday. Welcome, Wyeth. And Anna Vickers.
Yes, thank you. Let me just taking a second to pull up here. Okay, and I know we've talked with kind of a small section of the council about this with the local affairs committee. So some of them have heard some of this before. So yes, I'm here to talk with you today about the proposed public art policy. This was kind of grew out of the Mobilize the Magic City project that happened starting in 2023, I believe. And we'll kind of walk you through that process a little bit more. So why are we here? There's been increased interest in public art projects, including there's the Space to Place grant application that happens every year. There's lots of murals going on, lots of different things. There's a need for a clear, concise roadmap for everyone, including artists, neighborhoods, and decision makers alike. We want to create a welcoming, vibrant, and safe community where people want to live. And additionally, council requested a replacement for the policy that was revoked, which had been put into place in, I think, 2011, and it was very hard to implement. We found some notes from the one time that the ad hoc committee came together, and they said, basically, this isn't working. Let's try to figure out something else. I want to go back to that second bullet point, the need for the clear, concise roadmap for everyone. We just had an example recently, which I think is a really good one. the Bird reached out to us and wanted to do a mural on the 21st Street underpass. And because there wasn't any sort of a policy, it was kind of a scramble. It took a lot of time from Wyeth and a lot of time from Debbie to try to figure out like what kind of process should they follow, who should they bring it to, who should weigh in, what criteria are they using. So while we know that this is going to take staff time to implement, I would say if we have a clear public art policy, then we can kind of deal with it more on the lower staff level rather than having to take our directors away from their many busy things that they're working on to kind of troubleshoot and do some sort of ad hoc situation. So I thought that was a really good example that happened just within the past month, I think. Okay, so going back to the Mobilize the Magic City project, we had 3 main goals: to hire an artist in residence, to install 2 placemaking hubs along the neighborhood bikeway, to improve safety and walkability, which we did. We wanted to complete a public art committee feasibility study. And then kind of when we started going through this process and figuring out, wow, there really is a need for this, we pivoted and started looking at developing that policy and a potential committee. And then we also developed tools to support public art and associated processes in Billings, including developing a placemaking playbook, which is available on the city's website. Sorry, this is also kind of small. So this was our process for the Mobilize the Magic City project. We had a leadership team that we established. We advertised a call for artists and selected local artist Terry Porta. We did public outreach and visioning, including establishing an advisory team, and we had a calendar of community events. Our artist in resident developed concepts for the pieces, incorporating community input and values. Those concepts were reviewed by the relevant departments, and the locations were approved. And the pieces in parks were approved by the Parks Board. It was at this point that we discovered that there was a public art policy on the books from 2011. And so we did our best to follow the policy as well as we could. As I alluded to earlier, it involved an ad hoc public art committee, which meant that the mayor had to go through appointing those committee members every time. So it was a pretty arduous process. And then council ended up repealing that policy and asking for a replacement. The art went into production. We did things like engineering review, getting building permits, applied for and approved. We installed the art and did ribbon cutting, and then we incorporated lessons learned into the playbook and also into this draft policy. So these are some pictures from the process. The bubble I have down there is there was lots of learning and discovery. It was difficult even for me as a city staff member to know what to do, who to go to. And I could just walk down the hall and say, hey, Jessica, do I need a building permit for this? So you can imagine how difficult it would be for somebody who's not a city employee to navigate this process. So that's really what we want to try to address with the process is we know that public art is happening. How do we make it really clear and understandable for everybody out there? Okay, so how did we develop these recommendations for the policy? So as I mentioned, that Mobilize the Magic City experience was definitely eye-opening. We learned quite a bit. We consulted with our advisory committee, which included 30 plus members. We sent a survey out to city department heads and other city stakeholders, and we sent out the draft documents a couple of times. We also had several meetings and conversations with specific city departments to address their specific needs. We consulted with local experts such as BSED with their Space to Place grant. We consulted with national experts from the National Endowment for the Arts. We collaborated, we had a meeting with Chris and Gina also did several legal reviews of the policy, and she's had her eyes on it. And then we also presented to the Government and Local Affairs Committee. I know we took up quite a bit of their time on a day when they were trying to get to the legislative part of that committee, but we really appreciate their feedback from that. So the public art policy as it's drafted now has several different elements. We'll kind of talk about the first two. The application guide, and appeal form are kind of a little bit in the weeds. I can certainly review those with you if you'd like, but just wanted to let you know that they're available. So the main parts that we'll focus on today are the workflow and the public art policy draft. And this is also very small. I have copies for you all have it on your screen. Okay. I apologize to the public viewing. Okay, so if somebody has a great public art installation idea, they would ideally look at this flow chart. And they would ask, okay, does it occur on public city property? If the answer is no, they don't need to come to us generally. Now, we do recommend that people still check with the planning department. For instance, there may be businesses that they're like, oh, I have this great idea for a mural on my building, but it's really advertising their business, and then that would be a sign, and then we'd review it under our sign code. So just as a touch point, always good to check with planning, but they wouldn't have to go through this process. The next question, continuing down the flow chart, is would the installation occur in an outdoor space? If the answer is no, they don't have to go through the process, and they would just follow whatever individual departmental policies there were. I know with the last public art policy, there was a lot of questions like, do I need to go to the public art committee to hang a poster by my desk? So we don't want to get into that. And also the library, this was one part where we talked with the library. They've got a lot of great programming going on and kind of already have a flow for that. And so we didn't want to mess with that too much. So then continuing down the workflow, if it is in an outdoor space, the next question is it a physical art installation versus an event? If it is, then they would, if it is a physical art installation, then they would complete the public art application. And so then they would submit that application to planning staff. My coworker, Tate Johnson, was not able to be here today, but she's our new neighborhood planner. And we worked it into her job description that she would be the one kind of managing this process. I know that was kind of a thing with the last one. There wasn't necessarily somebody kind of overseeing the whole process. This time we've got it worked into her job description. She would be in charge of that. So she would take the application and start processing it. If the art installation was in the parks, the application would go to the Parks Board. We've had several discussions with them. And they want to be still involved in the process, but they've said they really don't feel comfortable being the final approver for this public art. They feel like somebody who's more attuned to what they should be looking at should be the final decider on that. So either way, then next it would go to departmental review meeting. And being involved in land use and subdivision and things like that, I really based this departmental review meeting on what we do for our departmental review meetings in subdivision, in the subdivision process. I think it's very useful. Staff all gets together in a room and we say like, hey, you need to follow this regulation from this code and this regulation from here. So that we can kind of get everything out in one meeting and you don't have to go, the artist or the resident or whoever doesn't have to go tracking down each individual staff member. So at this point, so the staff would be reviewing based on other city codes, resolutions, and ordinances, as well as the public art policy. They would be trying to work with the artist or resident to get this approved, but we do say in the policy, it is possible that there's pieces that come forward that we just can't approve because they violate other codes, regulations, they're unsafe, things like that. So if it passes that staff level review, the piece would go to the Public Art Committee, which I'll talk about in a minute. This would be a publicly advertised meeting where the public would be invited to comment. And the committee would be reviewing based on the criteria and the policy. If the piece was approved, then they would just start coordinating with the appropriate parties and install the piece. If it was denied, obviously they would not install the public art piece. They could appeal to the city council, to you all, if they felt that the decision was unfair. And that was something we added after discussion with the local affairs committee in January. Okay, so diving into kind of the text of the policy. So it defines public art as original artwork which is visually or physically accessible to the public and which does not require a fee or other prerequisite to observe. As I mentioned, it regulates public art placed on public property. And then this one is also kind of a tongue twister, but it also regulates public art placed on city-owned property located on private property, of which we're mainly talking about commercial garbage containers. This is something that would have to be kind of a separate regulation, but there's been a lot of talk about, could we wrap commercial garbage containers with art instead of requiring those enclosures, which don't work very well. It seems like, I think they never quite get the door closed when solid waste has to come get it. So anyway, that's why we included that caveat of city property on public property. This is the proposed committee makeup. We're proposing 7 members. One would be an artist at large. One would be a representative from the economic or community development field. One would be referred by the Billings Arts Association. One would be a representative referred by the Native American Development Corporation. And these 2 organizations, they really were instrumental in helping us put this policy together and kind of figure this out. So that's why they're represented on the committee. One representative from the engineering, architecture, landscape architecture, 3-dimensional art field. The idea being if somebody comes with a sculpture or something, you want somebody who has some experience evaluating that. And then 2 members of the public that have an interest in public art. So that could be pretty much anybody in our community. And then the committee would report annually to council on the approved pieces. At that meeting or at that presentation, they would also share like, hey, these are things that we feel like are going really well with the public art policy. These are things that we feel like could be changed because we know with any new policy, there will always be little adjustments that need to be made. Okay, so the Public Art Committee would be reviewing based on these criteria. There's also some kind of guardrails that I'll talk about on the next slide, I think. But so they'd be reviewing to see how well the art adheres to the following criteria. So the project will have a positive impact in the Billings community. The project is accessible to the community and connected to its surroundings. The project enhances the beauty and or comfort of its location. The project activates a place to make it more engaging. The project brings people together or encourages people to gather and linger. And then finally, the project has artistic merit. And then in this, the way that we proposed it, the council would break any ties. If the Public Art Committee couldn't decide one way or the other, they'd bring it to the council and then also hear the appeals, but would not be otherwise involved in the review process. So a couple of things that if there are questions about these, I will probably just turn it over to Gina because she is far better able to answer these questions than I am. But Gina explained to me, and I've learned a lot, that there is something called government speech. So it says in the policy that we would not be creating a forum for public expression. This artwork would be government speech, and so we don't have to necessarily let everything that comes to us go into existence. And then there's also a list of things that are prohibited considering the appropriateness of artwork in the context of the local community standards and values. I can certainly go through those for you, but I didn't want to list them all out. There's quite a few there. But so those kind of help provide the guardrails of things we don't want offensive art coming and things like that. So that's described more in the policy. Some miscellaneous clauses. So it includes a clause for the deaccessioning of artwork. So that would be taking art out of commission if the piece was damaged to the point where we couldn't repair it. Then staff can just go ahead and take it away. Otherwise, it would go to the Public Art Committee for their review. It requires that 10% of the project budget be donated to the city for maintenance or removal of the art piece. I know there's, maintenance is always a question. And so this would help with minor maintenance of the piece or help us to remove the piece in the case in which it was totally destroyed. But the intent would not be to, if it's kind of totaled, so to speak, we would be removing it rather than fixing. The airport is excluded from the policy. That was one of our specific discussions. They just have so many federal regulations they have to follow that we felt it was best that they just did their own thing. And then there's also in the city code, there's a prohibition on writing and marking and painting on the right-of-way. So this would give council's consent to do so. It does follow, there's a resolution that was adopted in 2021 or 2022 that was used for the eBird asphalt art project. And so it would follow all those regulations for the asphalt art. So that's kind of another kind of set of regulations on top of the ones explicitly listed in this policy. And then it would also have to be approved by the Public Works Director and Met Transit if it was on Met Transit property. Okay, so that's all I have for you for the presentation. So we'd love to hear your feedback. And then we'd be bringing this for your action at an upcoming council meeting. So with that, I can take any questions. Oh yeah, and there are a few people from the committee here. I may potentially call on them to help answer questions. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa. Anything else from Wyatt or Anna? No. Okay. I'll turn to council. I'm going to comment for Council Member Boyette. I apologize. I did not get to you my list of comments over the 4th of July weekend, but I do have a number. My general view is this is a huge step forward. Thank you for all your effort, the committee's efforts. A lot of work has gone into what's a really complicated process, and we're largely creating from scratch. So I appreciate that. I do have a number of miscellany, some more important than others. And so in the staff report, there was a request for input on whether to just put this on a consent agenda for approval or come back. I will give you written input rather than taking the time to go through all that tonight. But my personal answer to that is I think it's largely baked, but not fully ready for prime time. And I think staff would be better served to come back and give us another chance before we have to just finally approve it. That's my bottom line input on that particular question. And I can get into more details on some of the specifics as well later, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation at this point. So Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, what does 10% mean? Define that, and does that mean the real cost, or is there, what happens if there's 100 people helping, there's no cost? How do you determine what this 10% really is?
Sure, thank you. So in the application, and I'm gonna pull that up here a second, we do ask for a budget, and I believe we ask them to, I believe we ask for, okay, it looks like we don't have volunteer hours, but we could certainly work that in terms of the cost of the hours. But yeah, the idea is that we want to capture, as I said, minor maintenance and things like that to the project.
I think it does have volunteer hours in the application I'm looking at.
Does
There's
it? Okay.
There's paid
Yeah.
labor that says do not include volunteer labor. Then the very bottom it says volunteer hours.
Thank you.
And so
I thought it was in there.
But to follow up on his question on that is, so are you going to assign an hourly wage to that to come up with the actual total project cost and then
Mhm.
charge 10% of that total?
Yeah, I think we could do that. I know the state of Montana has a volunteer rate that we could use. I've applied for several grants where they have that, so we could definitely work that in there.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yes, thank you, Councilmember. So as of right now, it says that they'd be available kind of across the board. The idea is that the way I'm thinking about this is it would be, for instance, if there were graffiti, you'd go and kind of take care of that. I think it might have been a comment you made a while ago that, we don't want to have to take it down just for a minor, um, thing that we have to fix. And so I guess the way I'm thinking about it is addressing specific issues such as graffiti or things like that.
And if I can just follow up on that, Lisa, was the point that it is pooled or is there separate accounting per project? So in other words, theoretically, one expensive project could use the 10% maintenance fee from other projects.
The way I have it written now, it would be pooled.
Okay,
yeah.
so the intent is to have a single pool. Okay, thank you.
And
Other questions?
you back on that 10%, because I actually don't think that's enough, because I think some projects may be smaller and maybe not be very, very much maintenance, and others may have much more maintenance. So the other question is, if this project has to be decommissioned, the cost to remediate that and remove that so that it's a blank canvas per se is going to be much more than 10% and often. And so I think if we're going to consider that in 10 or 20 or 30 years that, or 5 years, this project is going to have to be decommissioned, that we should look at what that cost is expected to be and then have those funds there so the city isn't bearing the cost of having to remove that art for whatever reason it may be.
So, is this on? Yeah, there it goes. Okay, I have to eat it here. Okay. So just to follow up on that, Councilmember Neese and Mayor and Council, I guess I think, yeah, we want to figure out a balance, because if we are requiring too much, I mean, we want to incentivize and make it possible for public art to happen. So I think trying to figure out what that looks like. This was trying to put funds aside, as Elise said, and pooling them. So we have a fund. It continues to get added to as pieces get done. We're not assuming that, pieces are going to be, destroyed, constantly. I mean, I guess hopefully not. So that fund wouldn't be, just exhausted on a continuous basis. But I think trying to figure out, I guess, a percentage, if that's the goal, which we have now, to say, yeah, there's a set aside, but not so much that then it's like, well, I'm not going to go forward with this because I can't even, we're having to contribute so much to maintenance. So I think trying to figure out that balance. I think the other thing is that's tough with this, and we have worked through it to this point already as well, is there's lots of different, obviously, types of art. And so that's a challenge. We don't know yet. I mean, it was interesting, just as a really quick aside. So I finally got to go to the Tippett Rise Art Center last week after trying to get into it for 3 years, which is another challenge, which we're trying not to have here. But it was great. But yeah, there's pieces there that you're like, wow, yeah, this would be, quite a deal if we were putting some of these things in the public right away. versus, smaller pieces versus some of the pieces like that were done at North Park and at 10th Street that are, pretty manageable. So I think trying to kind of figure this out and go forward and say, okay, we're going to start at some percentage and then let's, as we get into this, we might have to come back and say, yeah, we need to adjust that because we're seeing, certain types of art or whatever that could be more expensive than others. So anyway, I think just trying to balance it is, as I guess what the point of what I'm saying.
Maybe
And
a minimum of 10% with the committee's discretion to say, hey, based on this project, it's going to have to be more.
Yeah, that'd be something we can.
Again, that's the expertise of
look at.
probably having the engineer on there to know that, hey, this is going to be a really expensive project to maintain or to have to, remove.
Yeah, no, that's something to consider. Yeah, and in fact, and when we did the pieces that are up, the engineering and some of the design review work was somewhat, that was the artists working on it, and then obviously through our program. But yeah, we do look at all that, especially if it's somewhere where it might get run into or something.
Wyeth, on that topic, how about possibility of it being less than 10%? Back to your incentivization point, they say that you can tell what somebody values by looking at their checkbook. And in this case, where the goal is for it to cost the city nothing, it says we don't value art. We're not willing to pay anything. So that causes me some concern. I could see some benefit to staff having some flexibility. Just as Councilmember Neese says, if it's something that's likely to create a lot of vandalism and cost of maintenance, that should be taken into account, or vice versa. There's really no reason to think that. Then why not they get a break? So I guess I'd be in favor of creating a 10% default. It's just so people have a sense, but maybe having some flexibility to go up or down from that, because right now there's an inconsistency between the policy and the application guide. So paragraph 20 says budget shall be 10% of the project cost, and the guide says shall not be more than 10% of the project cost, which implies something could be less than 10%. So we need some consistency on that topic. Other questions, Councilmember Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. Elise, this is great. I'm really happy to see this. You and the committee, everybody's done a ton of work, and it's very well put together. My only tweak to this might be to suggest defining more of council's role in the appeal process. What I wouldn't like to see happen is for something to kind of get appealed to council, and then it just becomes does council like it? So we've got some pretty strict, or at least guidelines, anytime we look at zoning policies, annexation, that kind of stuff. I'd just like to see, these are your guidelines that you have to evaluate this on, right? It can't just be on just gut feel, I like it or not, or, I might not like some art, but it might fit well as a public piece. So that's just what I would say is just let's find a way to get council more aligned with what the committee is also going to be, evaluating based on.
Sure. Thank you. We can certainly work that in.
Councilmember Rowan?
Thanks, Mayor. I think I want to ask sort of a follow-on to that. I can understand not wanting to have a process where we're all just going, meh, don't care for it, get rid of it, right? But I also think it's an important distinction we've drawn here that this is not a sort of free forum for public expression, right? It's not the same as the courthouse lawn, for example. So what are the circumstances in which, other than an appeal, council could say, wow, I don't know how that got through, but this is really offensive to a corner of the community, or this is, causing a significant, blowback? Because I understand there's the issue in there for safety, because clearly there has been a ton of work in this resolution. It's really thoughtful. But what are the circumstances in which perhaps when you came in for an annual report, or when we started seeing a slew of people saying, gosh, this is really not what we expected in a government, public space, what could council do? Could council of its own accord say, you know what, we need to review that?
Sure. Yes. So as we have written now, paragraph 19 is the deaccessioning of artwork.
Yeah.
So that talks about, it says that the art may be deaccessioned by the Public Art Committee for criteria including, but not limited to, irrelevance, the permanent collection. Yeah. So anyway, I think maybe we could add something like, request from council, that type of thing, or
I might suggest that
public
it not be
feedback.
a single member of council, that there
Sure.
be some sort of,
Of a vote.
4 members or whatever, that we're not just
Yeah.
having any one kind of, but if a significant, neighborhood or multiple council members are like, gosh, this really needs a second look, maybe there's a space for some sort of review.
Sure. I can add that. Thank you.
And if I can just follow up on that, Elise, on the whole issue of de-ascensioning, it can be controversial what art to put up. It can be really controversial about what art to take down.
Sure.
And so my recommendation would be that we have a catch-all in the de-ascensioning language that gives the city tremendous flexibility on that. That is basically for no cause or any cause, because now we have to have criteria, and there's some criteria listed, although it says but not limited to, it doesn't include what else might be included. And I think we want a really big out if we need to, so that somebody puts a lot of money into a project like this can't say, hey, we had a contract and you're stuck with that for eternity.
Mhm.
And if we want to enter into some sort of binding agreement for a period of time, great, but at least 20 years is not 200 years. And that would force some discussion about the timing. So
Yes.
something to keep in mind. So another, Councilmember Niche, you had a hand up?
Yeah, Mayor, I think that's something that I agree with you on that, but I think I want to bring up something that it was mentioned that about when they did the policy, we had legal review some of this about the language and what can or cannot go up. And so what I didn't see in here is that the legal is going to review any of these pieces of art to determine whether or not it really conforms to that. So we're leaving the committee to decide, does it or does it not, meet this legal criteria? And so did I miss that in here, that the legal department should be reviewing every single piece of art to make sure that it's not violating?
So I don't think that would be the intention, and maybe I can have Gina come up as I look at her.
So we are leaving the committee to determine whether or not it's
That's correct.
it's political speech or not political speech, or violates or doesn't violate.
Yes. And Gina, would you like to add anything to that? No. Okay.
Okay, that I want to be clear how the policy is.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, other questions or comments for Elise feedback? One other thing I had on my list was, I think we need a clear exception for private advertising on public property. That's kind of artwork, and I think would meet the definition of artwork, but I don't think it's intended to be. And here I'm thinking specifically advertising of events on banners on the skyways, and also wraps on buses. I don't think there's any intent that that would be included here. So we just want to make sure that it's clearly excluded.
Yes. Yes. 14G. So this is all the things that are prohibited. So it's prohibited if it promotes messages appearing to advertise or promote a product or private entity, corporation, neighborhood, business, or other community organization. This is considered a sign and will be reviewed under the City of Billings sign code, which we would, and we have the sign code experts here. I don't think we would allow that type of sign on public property, is my understanding, but I can let Anna jump in if she'd like to.
Okay, we just want to make sure, or private event or something like that, Strawberry Festival, for example,
Sure.
So also just to clarify, transit, that's why we worked with transit and included them as part of that review, because if there's anything on transit buses, benches, any, bus shelters, they're going to have to be part of that review for any of those things. So it doesn't bypass that. It still has to be looked at, just like now with transit has, and they have their own advertising program and everything.
Okay. What else, council? We'll have an opportunity for public comment in just a minute. Councilmember Denise?
Yeah, just a quick question, because I was looking for, it said here that and there's an Exhibit A of some sort, and I didn't see any of the documents labeled Exhibit A, and so I may be missing, maybe it's labeled something else. You know
Yeah,
which-
sorry, that's my mistake. I should have all these attachments. So the workflow, the application guide, and the appeal, those would be when we formally adopt this, those would be the attachments.
Okay. And I am still concerned about this committee as a whole. It sounds to me that once this policy is in place, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but they will approve any art project on public city property in the city, no matter what it is. So we could have on the corner of Metra, well, that's not city property, that's Met. So that's usually like downtown, we have the sales. I don't know what art that's called, but that's an art project. We could have that put up, and I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of $1,000s that may be, but this committee is going to approve that, and then the city is going to be required to maintain that. And so they're binding the city into a financial obligation in perpetuity. Do I understand that correctly?
So I guess, Wyeth, would you like to jump in on that? It might be.
Councilmember Neese and Mayor and Council, I mean, yeah, I think that's, again, why we're trying to both be clear about that there is a maintenance program attached to this, and then also there are allowances, and you were talking about some of them here just previously, allowances for where the city would take something down or have to, take it, remove it, and making sure that there's plenty of flexibility for that. So I think, and as I said earlier, I think, yeah, if we're looking at a piece like the Sky Point, very significant, very large, a lot of things going on there, that would be something where this would be very helpful, but also there'd be a lot of consideration to what you're talking about, which is, okay, do we have the maintenance type set aside available? What are we looking at going forward? And what are the issues with where it's located in the right of way and stuff like that?
The policy doesn't really give that out, except for trusting that the committee is going to do that. But in essence, we're delegating financial approval to a committee, if I understand what this is doing. One of the things as I looked through, because I looked at your application too, is as Wyeth mentioned about the maintenance. I don't see anything here that talks about what the maintenance of this is going to be an annual or biannual or 10-year annual, like these. I know the sales have to replace it ever so often. So there's nothing in there talking about what the art project is going to cost. But I am really concerned, and maybe we should hear from Gina on whether or not the council can even delegate their authority to a committee for financial approval of items when all our other committees are advisory committees that only send us ideas or send us things on the consent agenda to approve. And then we are the ones, the council is the one who actually approves the financial and future obligations of the city.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll let Gina jump in. I guess I'd just mention kind of with Wyeth, I think the idea is that that these pieces all have a useful life essentially, and that the assumption would be when they reach their useful life and we've kind of exhausted maybe approximately that maintenance budget, that they would be taken down. So, but I'll let Gina jump in on the rest.
As Gina's getting ready, I would ask if Sky Point would be considered a piece of public art, because I'll ask that question. Is Sky Point a piece of public art? My first speculation would be it's not, that it's something we chose to put in the right of way, and we're funding its maintenance through, in part, the park maintenance district for that area. So it's certainly in a public space and public asset.
I'm looking at the definition in paragraph 2. I think it arguably does fall within the definition. Public art is defined as an original artwork which is visually or physically accessible to the public and which does not require a fee or other prerequisite to observe. And then earlier it talks about property or art that is commissioned by the city. So it does not clearly, it's not clearly excluded, I guess. And which also maybe begs the question of whether we shouldn't expressly exclude architectural structures intended to be occupied, i.e. buildings, unless we want the committee to approve every city building, which, since it's probably going to come through the council anyway, I think would probably be unnecessary, right? I apologize. You guys were going to follow up on this question, right? So Gina?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Neese, I think that that's a really good point that you've made. And I think that council certainly has the ability to delegate that authority. However, I clearly Article 2, I think it's 2500 is this section that discusses the boards and commissions. I would like to look at that section a little bit closer to see if there are any code amendments that might be necessary just to make that more clear so that authority can be delegated if that's what council chooses to do here. Because I clearly council can appoint the board members it wants, and that has the appropriate requirements or criteria or whatever criteria you would like to see so that you would trust that they're making the appropriate decisions. And also, as you can see in the flow chart, there is a lot of staff discussion. There's a lot of, there's staff liaisons. So I think that clearly you're getting that kind of input that is, I wouldn't expect that staff would advise or assist in this committee approving something that was going to cost millions of dollars or something. And if council has that concern, I think it might be a good idea for us to look at this resolution a little closer. We could insert a provision to address that kind of a issue or concern, that if it looks like a maintenance cost is going to be so significant that that's something that maybe does require council input
Yeah, I
or
think
something.
something like that, I think it could be easily solved by just saying, I mean, this is, you've got, as I read through this, there's a lot of good, like you say, people and experts that are looking at this art to determine whether it's valid art or not. But I think it would be a very simple, as we do with the TIF projects, they come to us and we look at these TIF projects and then we approve them. It wouldn't take but a few minutes to put them on the consent agenda after this board has a recommended approval, not approved, but a recommended approval. And that would solve the entire thing, because then we as a council are approving it, approving whatever financial future obligations there are, and there wouldn't be a question as to whether or not they are actually approving any kind of financial obligation. And that would be my recommendation, is to just change that from them approving it to a recommended approval of the council, and it comes to us on a consent agenda.
Okay, Councilor Aspenlighter, Councilor Ripson.
And Chris, maybe this is just a functional and operational question for you. I mean, assuming we have this maintenance fund and we have, X number of art pieces out in the community, and we expend the limit of what we have in the maintenance fund, but there is more maintenance to be done or replacement or things like that, where does the money come from? And does this agreement take into consideration us hitting the wall, the limit of whatever we have in a maintenance fund, and give us a backstop, to this agreement that we have with these artists, that if we don't have the proper funds to conduct the maintenance, it may not get maintained until there are sufficient funds there, or it gets decommissioned because it can't be maintained. Are there provisions like that in place, and how would you, as the city administrator, handle a situation in which, we have multiple of these pieces out, but we don't have the maintenance fund to do proper maintenance? What are we going to do in that scenario?
So I think Councilmember Aspenlighter, I mean, ultimately, any of our expenses are going to be included in the budget process. So as Elise could answer, what's in the policy. I also keep in mind what has been public art and public spaces for the past several decades. And it hasn't been something that has come as some kind of a fiscal impediment to our operation. There's a sensitivity to it, and a wise sensitivity to it. But ultimately, if the fund didn't have enough proceeds, that would be the place in which either triggering the decommissioning or us having in our budget X dollars, whether it's, these are all either going to be in public right of ways or in public parks
Follow up, Mr. Mayor.
or on public land, I guess, public
If-
building spaces.
Would you see that coming in the budget of planning, or would you see that coming in the budget of code enforcement, or would you see that coming in the budget of public works? Like, I just want to know where I'm looking for it.
Sure.
Well, if I could just add, Councilmember Aspenleiter. So when we started working through this policy, we had an option that the art would be loaned to the city. And in working with Gina, she advised that was not the best legal decision. So all of the art would be donated to the city. So it does become our property after it's like through this process, it would become the city's property. And so I think at that point, I think we can do what we want with it. I mean, obviously we want to be respectful to the artists and we'd let them know and things like that. But if we can't maintain it, we can't maintain it, I think is kind of our thinking.
And I guess just so that I'm clear, in these agreements that we have in place with the artists, I don't want there to be any hard-pressed obligation that we are financially going to maintain with unequivocally something that we can't, funding that we don't have, that there is clauses in there that allow us to say, hey, we don't have the funding. Because, I mean, something like this comes in a budget line item and this room is going to explode in conversation about what the hell are we doing. And I just want to make sure that we're very clear as we're talking about this, that, there is no general fund money going to go to pay for maintenance on art. If the maintenance fund can fund it, super. If it can't, then it's not going to get done because we don't have money to do it any other way. So I just want to be very clear that in the policy, that consideration is given and that we're not in these agreements with artists signing ourselves up for an obligation that we can't meet.
Sure. No, I think as things work forward, I would imagine Andy, administration, and finance together would bring to the council, where does it make sense for this to be, budgeted for? Is it a facility thing? Again, there's probably 3 or 4 different places, but having it be deliberate and open so that the policy body understands where it is, and then a determination of just how much money is this, what's this measured on? Is it hundreds, is it thousands, tens of thousands? So that it could be seen and identified.
Scott, you bring up a good point, because again, on the artist agreement, there isn't anything about they're talking about, that other than they donate it, but the city's, they're not going to fight the fact that we're going to remove it, or something like that. I mean, maybe the artists, if they want to round up some volunteers to donate for additional maintenance and repair or whatever, great. But I agree with you, it really does need to stay out of the general fund budget.
Councilor Ripsis?
Thank you, Mayor. So that kind of gets to one of the things that I had noticed that wasn't in here, but it's on this whole topic of financial issues. It seems to me the Public Art Committee could have a role in raising funds to commission art. They could also have a role in raising funds to maintain art. And there's nothing describing the committee that kind of puts that capacity on them. So I think that would be something good to draw out here. Because there might be some instances where the committee says, hey, here's a great opportunity. We don't have anybody to do it, but let's raise the funds and make it happen. So just making sure that they have the ability to do that, I think is good. And then getting back to the whole advisory board kind of thing, our charter, I mean, regardless of what 2500 says, our charter says boards can have no administrative authority. So regardless of whether or not they're putting us into any kind of long-term financial situation, that seems to me to be just the approval of art is an administrative function. So I would agree that it should, a recommendation of approval or denial should come through the city council on consent agenda and make it an actual advisory board, because I don't think we have the ability to delegate that in any way based on our charter.
Okay, thank you. One of the members of the committee, Melissa, has just sat down. Did you want to comment, or you just wanted a better view?
Oh, well, I just thought Melissa has been having conversations with people exactly about what you're talking about, that, you know, maybe there could be some fundraising involved in the committee. So we can definitely describe that more, but if she'd like to add anything, I can.
Sure. Yeah. Regarding the topic of fundraising, that was one of the immediate needs that our committee noted. That is where a lot of municipalities go to sort of, as Mayor Cole indicated, endorse their support for the arts. They'll do 1% for the arts, things like that. That's not necessarily going to work here. And so we had a really stellar group that connected us with the Billings Community Foundation, who has said, you know, we would love to be involved in taking a lead in helping to fundraise for maintenance, or every year during the Yellowstone Valley Gives, you know, let's say, let's crowdsource indigenous art or artwork here or there. And so I think that our community is willing to step up and support council in this, but we need to have the pathway for that to happen.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
If I could also just comment on recent discussion about removal and cost and things like that. I would like the policy to clearly give the committee the power to at least negotiate, not approve, but negotiate contracts with the donor organization or individual or artist, because we're talking about a lot of details that might want to work out on a case-by-case basis. So even though we might want to make it very clear that the city has the ability to remove artwork for any reason, which I support, if you're the artist, you may say, okay, fine, but when you remove it, I get it. Or if you're going to remove it, I get the ability to cover those maintenance costs or those replacement costs or something like that. And those are the sorts of things that can be worked out in a separate document. Any policy we have is not going to be able to cover every last detail. And we just want to make sure that there's something in the policy that recognizes there may be side agreements here. So, and then I think we should move on soon. So Wyeth and Councilmember Bernice.
Yeah, I guess just I want to go back to the bringing it to council with a recommendation. I guess we're really going to need some clarity there in terms of if it's a financial tie, because I guess by the time, if we go through this whole process, and obviously there's some changes we're talking about making, which is great already. But if it goes through all that and then there's some kind of recommendation to council and it's somehow tied to the funding piece, I guess I'm not tracking so far on what that looks like, because I could see that, because there's all this awareness obviously through the whole process of that funding issue. And so that's going to be addressed and worked on. And so if at that point it comes to council and the council says, well, no, this is, $10 too much, or I don't like this, or I'm not, we're back to kind of sideboards on this process, because otherwise everything that just came before that becomes kind of pointless. To be really blunt. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. So we're going to need to figure out if every single piece ultimately is being recommended by the committee to council to approve or not approve, and it's the financial piece that is the tie, then we need to know what that looks like. Because I don't know what that looks like sitting here right now from a council standpoint, and how that doesn't end up undermining the entire rest of the process. So just want to get that out there, and we can figure out how to proceed. But that's not clear to me right now.
Can I ask what is, I think, an important question to that? The 10% number, I suspect, was a little bit of a pulled out of the air. It's good to have a number. But maybe it's too high, maybe it's too low. Do we have any data or experience or gut feeling that makes us think that number is right on, too high or too low? Other cities use it, or can anybody go into to more experience there?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I can certainly do some more research. I guess most places I don't think require, at least the policies that I looked at, I don't think that they required a maintenance fund. So I think this is kind of above that. Like I said, our intention was minor maintenance. If it's totaled, we're not dealing with it. It really, I think it really came from one of Councilmember Boyette's comments. Like, what if somebody comes and, does some graffiti? We want to be able to, we don't want to just be like, oh, we have to take down the whole thing for this one, graffiti thing. Like, let's figure out a way to fix it. So the intention was minor maintenance. I can certainly research more and see if there's other things out there. I didn't see any. I reviewed maybe 20 public art policies. Didn't see anything, but I can certainly search more for that.
Just kind of ask the question. I don't know what the answer to it is.
Sure. Thank you.
It doesn't seem like that number is, to me, too low. 10% of a project is quite a bit of money for most of these things, I would expect, but that's just my gut.
Thank you. Yes. And we had in there, and I apologize, I realized you caught one of my places where I didn't change it. Originally we had in there up to 10%, with the thought that 10% could be fairly onerous for some projects. But then after kind of the discussions with the local affairs committee, we made it a required 10%. So we can definitely add some of that flexibility back in there.
Okay. Councilor Assmeyer?
I just encourage you maybe to talk to the Endowment for the Arts and see if there's any national statistics or any kind of guidance on outdoor art and what maintenance costs are associated with that. And maybe it's also a good policy to ask the artists themselves, like what do you foresee being maintenance associated with your project as a part of the proposal that they give to you, so that there's some kind of backing and at least some kind of justification for that. And maybe both are good to square up to say, hey, if you want to propose art, you have to also give us a proposed maintenance schedule associated with that. What do you foresee as maintenance on that? And at least get people that are proposing to do these things thinking about what maintenance looks like, so that we have some kind of idea and some kind of sense that's based on something anyway. Because Wyeth, I'm with you. Like, I'm gonna want to cartwheel down the stairs if we pull these things off of consent every time and have a conversation. Like, I'm gonna go bananas over wasting time on something like this. I agree with Tom. I don't think we can delegate it. I think Tom is 100% right, but I do not want to talk about this off of consent agenda every freaking time that we have a proposal either. So if we can get some kind of process that's maybe based on a standard by the endowment, and then also making these artists give us a maintenance budget or in a maintenance schedule for their art, I think that helps at least ground it in some level of data.
Thank you, Councilor Owen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Gina, can I throw one other idea out at you to maybe solve this? Would it be considered a delegation? And you don't have to answer this off the cuff, but would it be considered a delegation if we had a notification period instead? So the committee approves it, council gets an email notice, this is what's been approved. You have 14 days to tell us if you want to see this on an agenda or not. Would that constitute a delegation that would be inappropriate, or would that allow us to exercise our authority in a way that's more consistent?
I think that's certainly something for me to look at. I was actually just thinking in my mind that it could, the city administrator has administrative authority, so potentially we could rewrite some of these provisions to have this committee advise the city administrator or the city administrator's designee. It's an option, something to look at.
Would you
so
mind
that
looking
so
at
it
what I
would
suggested?
avoid like Councilmember Aspenleiter was just mentioning, avoid bringing everything on consent and risking that half an hour discussion on every piece of art.
Sorry, I think we could get to a position maybe where consent is implied unless we expressly say, and again, I'd pick a threshold number, 4 members or whatever. If 4 members say, nope, we really need to talk about that, then let's get it on, address it. But otherwise, silence is considered consent. I don't know that would constitute delegation, but I'd like to know.
I don't think it's a really great idea to put this on the city administrator either. I don't want that level of heat coming over something that seems benign and turns into an issue to be landing at the feet of the city administrator.
And a lot
from
of
an
time,
yeah,
frankly,
I
a lot of
don't,
time.
I don't like that idea at all. If I think Jennifer's idea is certainly something worth looking at. If we can do something like that, I'd certainly support something in that nature as well.
Okay, let's take public comment. If there is any public comment on this item number 3, or proposed city art policy, if anybody would like to comment, please come forward and do so. You know the routine. Just introduce yourself and try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, thank you. My name is Lisa Olmstead. I live at 2406 Woody Drive. And I know many of you know me in my consulting role. I'm going to take that hat off today. And I'm going to put on my Billings Community Foundation board member hat, my daughter of a professional artist hat, and my former tourism industry hat, and encourage you to support this initiative. 100% agree that there's some fine tuning. You know, I know many of you have acknowledged that it is a brand new policy, needs a little bit of fine tuning. I think that all of the discussion today has been incredibly valid and well taken points. I do think that it's worth considering that art installations run the gamut. You know, we're likely not talking about mini sky points. We're probably talking a little bit more about like a mural on the side of a building or something like that. So consider the scale, but I think that this next couple years is going to be a learning curve. I think you need to put a lot of trust into the committee, but perhaps think about whether there are some parameters that you can put on the committee to be able to trust that, you know, you're maybe not necessarily handing over the reins, but helping them to guide through the process, to learn the process together as a community. I do think that public art adds a lot to the community. You know, it gives people a sense of place, a sense of ownership. You know, you think about many of the murals that already exist in the community that are even contributed by children, by school groups, that really do, you know, like encompass the soul of the community. So I feel like all of this discussion, unsurprisingly, has been very left-brained. And I get that. And I can 100% respect that because I'm the left-brained member of my right-brained family. but I think we need to think about it from both perspectives. And you know, I think there's a lot of left-brained value to this policy because it helps to put some guide bars and some parameters and some expectations on what it is as a community that we're looking for. But concurrently, from the right brain side, I think it's important that our community value public art. You know, we're starting to see a lot of it in our community. And so I think someone new to Billings that comes in and sees all of the bright color and culture that is represented starts to understand that Billings does value those things. But I think as a city, having a designated policy that helps to both send the message that we want these things and we encourage these things helps to facilitate, helps to make it accessible. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Amy Aguirre, 1504 Lewis Avenue. I would just like to comment on 2 things. One of them is in reference to the volunteer hours that are used to create or install the piece. I think it would create a bigger burden for the artist to have to monetize that and add it to the total cost. The average artist is not a moneyed person, myself included. So to think that I wanted to do this public art display, but then to think, you know, the people that support it and want to help and be a part of that want to do that, but I have to monetize that support. That would discourage me as a person. And I think that would be kind of the general reception.
for that policy. And then my other point was about the 10%, where I think that, adding again that volunteer hours would greatly inflate that 10%. And I like the conversation as it's going towards making it kind of a sliding fee situation. I really hope that you can incorporate that into the policy, just as a general supporter of public art. Thank you.
Tony O'Donnell again. Two things occur to me. One is that I recall in the past there was a bit of public art that the governing authority decided to take down. The creator of that artwork sued for artistic incursion, and they won on the whole thing. So when you get involved in this, there's a lot of subjective things. The other thing is in terms of the maintenance costs, and the mayor bring up a good point of what is the right amount. Let's say that there's a mural and it is defaced by somebody spray painting it. Does the author of that want the city, Public Works, to be repainting that? Or will the artist have to come back and do that? Would they be willing to do that? And that would be two things to be considered in terms of coming up with some agreement.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tom McLean, 2702 Montana Avenue, number 305. I serve on the Parks Board, which has been the de facto art committee for a while until Lisa's history. I'm also with Big Sky Economic Development, where one of the programs that I lead is the Space to Place program, where we give out grants to support public art projects like you're talking about here. Not all of them are on public buildings or public right-of-ways, but several of them have been. And I think a policy like this is really important so that I can tell people, hey, what we've done so far is we basically say, hey, just make sure you're following all the rules, city rules, state rules, whatever, and put it on them. But this would give us some place to send them to say, hey, here's a resource for you. This is the process that the city has. I think it's been a really thoughtful process. I worked with Mobilize the Magic City Committee, and I think there's a lot of thought that's put into it. There might be some wrinkles that still need to be worked out, but it's well on its way to where it needs to be. As far as the maintenance fund, I realize that the budget's tight here, and you guys need to consider things like that. But I don't know. I think maybe on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes I can speak from experience that we've had some of the projects that we've had, murals that we've had on public places. I'm thinking our 6th Street underpass, another one on the 13th Street underpass, the skate park, the pedestrian park, or the pedestrian tunnel over on Shiloh by St. John's. One thing that public art does like that is it discourages tagging. The other thing is on at least 2 of those occasions, when those projects have been tagged, the artist has come back and fixed it. And it's their artwork. They want to, help out. Tyson Middle on 2 of those, the skate park and the Shiloh Tunnel, and then also Elise Leininger on the 6th Avenue or 6th Street underpass. So that's one thing that I think you should consider. And like it's been said, adding another 10% on top of these projects is sometimes that's going to be a burden for these people, because we offer up to $5,000 grants every year. We've funded 50-some projects over the past 8 years. But even that, these people they're gifting this to your community. They're gifting it with their labor. They've never really charged as much as they probably should for the ones that we funded. So I think it's something to consider when you look at what you're getting with this program. Thank you.
Denise Joy, 1600 Avenue E, number 10, 59102. What a privilege it is to be a public servant. Every time I speak at a podium, I have a mic. I'm so grateful that I get to be a public servant, a person who has a responsibility, but also the privilege of helping a community become the best it can be. And that's what this policy is about. So I was just a girl from Hardin, Montana, and I went to Cleveland, Ohio, and the first art class that I signed up to was called three-dimensional art. And the teacher was a famous artist, and he made these metal cutouts of different figures, and they were sitting beside a bus stop. And being a girl from Montana, I thought I should argue with this man. I didn't know him, but I got in an argument with him, and I said, is it really three-dimensional art? Because if you look at it from this side, but then the third dimension is just the width of the metal. So I don't really think that's three-dimensional art. And he said, what are you talking about? Of course it's three-dimensional art. It's a privilege to be able to talk about art. It's a privilege to be in a seat where you get to make a decision on how the artists of this community get to express themselves. As the question really isn't what is art, the question is what is leadership? How do you become the conduit through this policy for the aspirations of the artists in this community? Because there are many artists in this community who have aspirations for us. They have a genuine expression of what they feel for our community, what they've experienced, what they want this community to be. And this policy is a conduit for them to be able to express that. So I don't know what three-dimensional art is. I don't know if the width of a piece of metal is the third dimension, but I do know what leadership is. And leadership is being that conduit for the aspirations of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? No one's coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period. Thank you, public. Council, some final wrap up. My expectation is we'll come back to council at some point in the hopefully near future. Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Ashland.
Mayor, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like the group has enough information that they need to come back at a future date. I think we need to wrap this up and move on.
Councilmember Ashland, you want to disagree with that? That was the next thing I was going to go for. Can we do that? All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Very, very helpful conversation. We'll come back for our final item, number 5, the charter amendment discussion after a brief break. It is 7:43. We'll come back no later than 7:50.
Oh, they probably just don't stick down.
Not in my jacket. You need to. Yeah. All right. Welcome back, everyone. We left off, of course, item number 4. We've moved to August 4th. So next item up is item number 5, our city charter amendment discussion concerning possible reduction of city council members from 10 plus a mayor to 6 plus a mayor and redistricting. So I'm not sure, Gina really was the staff person on this. It was Councilmember Aspenleiter's initiative that triggered it. So I don't know if Councilmember Aspenleiter, you want to say anything before we turn it over to Gina?
I'll keep this brief because I presume that there's going to be a lot of back and forth and discussion around this. I think the goal here is to have some discussion about what language could look like, would look like, and discuss if 6 in a mayor is the right number. I know Councilwoman Owen had raised a question about 8 in a mayor. What I don't want today to get into is what does redistricting look like? You know, all the blocking and tackling of it. I think this is still at a high level of, hey, do we want to have a ballot question about a reduction in the overall size of council? The blocking and tackling will work itself out as we go through this. Really functionally, what we need to discuss as a policy body from my perspective is, do we want to move this forward, and how do we direct staff to come back with some language around what that would look like? Tonight, I don't think is necessarily intended to be an up or down vote, but to have a thorough conversation about that, and then have an up or down vote on the 28th, you know, as a formal action, either staying the same, going with a ballot measure and proposed language, or moving that one way or the other. That's my goal. I don't know necessarily that we need 2 work sessions for this. I know we had talked about having 2. I don't know that it needs to be 2. I guess we can determine that as the conversation plays itself out tonight. But the language that Gina put together, I think, shows that this is very simple language. It's not complicated. We're not changing the structure of government. We're just talking about what is the right size of this body for the city of Billings. And so I'll leave it at that, maybe kick it over to Chris and Gina to talk about what they've done, and then go from there.
I'll let Gina cover the legal side. I don't have anything to add. I mean, as we've said, it's just quite simple, straightforward, based on your initiative, and we want to be helpful and a resource.
Right. And so I don't really have a presentation because this is for your discussion. So I just put together some slides for you to help facilitate your discussion so that you could see it up. You're all looking at the same thing and can see this. So I have 6 slides. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but Mayor Scott, I mean, you kind of preface that saying, let's talk first about whether or not we're even going to talk about reducing the sizes. So before Gina got too far into this, which was really a lot of kind of implementation questions, I wonder if we should focus first on the foundational question of, should we be reducing the size of the council or not? And start there. And if we can come to a consensus that, yeah, we really need to look at, getting the size down, then we start going into, well, what does that look like at 6 or at 8 or whatever other number that we might want to talk to? So maybe if we want to kick it off before Gina, just on some foundational, why are we having this conversation?
Yeah, I'm fine with that too, because I think, the information that we got is kind of emphasizes how simple this really is. To me, I brought this forward because I think this body at 11 is unwieldy. It's hard to facilitate discussion. It's hard to facilitate relationships. It's hard to build a cohesive body that can move. And when I say a cohesive body that can move this city forward, I don't mean that we need uniformity in thought. I don't mean that we need to eliminate dissension and discussion on issues. But we are not terribly efficient in the way that we do that at the size that we are, in my opinion. We get bogged down a lot. And I don't necessarily think that for a 120,000 person community that 11 members representing that community is properly sized. I mean, to me, getting to somewhere closer to 6 wards, 1 council member per ward, and a mayor at large is a more reasonable size. Councilwoman Owen and I had a conversation today about, putting some thought into this as it relates to triggers for growth. And as this community grows and gets to 175 or 200,000 members, maybe there's some built-in triggers here in which we say, hey, when we hit 30,000 people per ward, we're going to go from 6 wards to 8 wards and build in some forethought to that. But what I would like to see us accomplish in this is getting more efficient and effective at building relationships and working in a cohesive group. I don't think that 11 members gives us the best fighting chance to build a cohesive group to represent our city and to move this city forward. I don't think it's efficient. I don't think it's effective. And I think it's just too cumbersome to go forward. I mean, I jokingly use the analogy when you and your wife or you and your husband or significant other go out with 5 other couples and you say, hey, where do we want to go to dinner? That's never an easy conversation, and everybody has, it takes 50 minutes to figure out where you're going to go. We do that weekly. and we try to make decisions with 11 people to try to lead this city. And I don't think that reducing the size of this reduces the input from the community. I don't think it reduces representation of our community. And I think it gives us a better fighting chance to work cohesively and build cohesively a group and a team that can help lead this city. So that's where I'm coming from in doing this. The financial savings associated with this they're minimal. I mean, they're a rounding error. $50,000 in a $450,000 or $450 million budget is not a needle mover. But when we're talking about having to cut another 1.2 million next year out of the general fund, $50,000 is not a rounding error in that. I mean, that's a half or 2/3 of a public safety FTE. So, I mean, I think we have some real conversations around those things. I don't think the fiscal savings is not the key driver. It's something that needs to be considered and acknowledged, but it's not the key driver. I think really the key discussion around this to me is how do we set this body and future bodies up to be successful and to work cohesively and to be able to build relationships that can lead the city, and not just with ourselves, but also with the city administration and the city staff. So that's how I'll kick it off and then jump in later.
Councilor Ripsis.
So thank you for that. And I would agree. If we had been set up with, 6 council members 40 years ago when we passed the charter, we probably wouldn't think anything of it, right? Because that's pretty normal. But we're not. So this feels weird because it's a change, not because 6 is a bad number or 8 is a bad number or whatever. It's just because it's a change, right? And I think you're right that the cost savings are trivial. I mean, if we take what we're doing and decrease it by 40%, and so each person has more to do, within 10 years, there's going to be we need to increase our compensation because we're all doing so much more than those bums ever did 10 years ago. And it's gone in a year. So I think the financial savings are probably not there. But I guess I'd just kind of be curious as to, some examples of things that we got hung up on as a result of us being 11 as opposed to 7. Right? I'm racking my brain and trying to think about where was it that our size was the determining factor in what tripped us up. And I'm not coming up with examples. Like, yes, we've had more discussion. We've had more questions, Roy. but but I don't think, Roy can sit on a group of 6 or a group of 10 and he's still going to ask his questions, right? So I'm trying, where is it that we get tripped up by the numbers as opposed to just our culture of being open to having discussions or, just having a lot of voices, more voices at the table? So do you have some examples? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll point to a couple things. I'll lead by the one thing that I hate more than anything on city council, and that's the city retreat, like the council retreat. We go into that council retreat and we get so sidebarred into so many different things that we can't even efficiently and effectively move through a visioning exercise for setting goals and targets for the city. If you look at us setting like the city's priorities, right? We had 3 meetings, I think, on that. And at the end of the day, what we got so bogged down in was wordsmithing the meaning of the. Now, I can understand your argument that, yeah, that maybe that's not a function of the numbers, but that's a function of our culture. And I think there's a hell of a lot of truth to that. The culture of this council and councils really dictates its ability to work cohesively as a group and move things forward. I wouldn't necessarily argue that. But does the number set that body up to be successful in building a good culture? And I think the more people you add into that mix, the harder it is to build relationships with each other. Some of us have strong relationships with some and not so strong with others. Some of us have ebbed in and out of those relationships with each other. And I think the smaller the group, the more emphasis gets put on building relationships and trust in a working relationship. And every organization that I've ever been a part of, nonprofits, boards of directors, businesses, the smaller the group, it inherently drives you to build a relationship, at least a level of respect and a working relationship with the people that sit at that table. With 11, we can all count, right? And it gets easy here to say, I just need 5 more. And you don't put the effort in to trying to build a relationship with 10 other people. You put an effort into building a relationship with 5 because you know that's all you need. Could that happen with 7, where you just focus on 3 others? Maybe, but it's a hell of a lot easier for me to see a path forward to building a relationship with 6 people than it is to trying to put the effort into building a relationship with 10. I mean, Kendra and I come from complete different political spectrums. And we have tried very intentionally to say, hey, let's get together once a month. And that works about once every 4 months. And I can't do that with 10 of you. I mean, I just don't even have the time. I don't have the time. You don't have the time to try to do that relational building, which I think is core and the foundation of us having a good working relationship. We don't have the time to try to build that successfully with 10 other people. So I look at this as giving ourselves an opportunity to build those relationships stronger with a smaller group that can be more efficient and effective at problem solving and dealing with difficult issues. So I picked a little one, but
yeah, I appreciate that, and I just want to ask kind of a follow-up to that. One of the benefits of what we have, because I think it's easy to find flaws. But one of the benefits in what the current structure is with the two members per ward. And what that allows us to do is things like our committee, our city administrators committee for the rec center. Or we've done multiple of these in the past where every ward has essentially a seat at the table as we're going through some of these policy decisions, whether it's budget committee or legislative committee outside of this table. We're able to do those things. And so if we can accept that, and I do, that smaller groups, relationships are easier to manage, not necessarily more successful, obviously, all comes down to personalities and the actual people, but especially in cases like this where it's, politics is at play, right? But if we can accept that, we also have to kind of give ourselves some credit for the existing structure that says we can have these groups of 5 that can work on things outside of this and have representation across the city. If we were to go to a 1 member per ward kind of thing, we would never be able to have that again. We would never be able to have a committee that Chris could pull together from across the city and work through a policy issue, having open, honest conversations like we do sometimes, and really kind of dig through some meaty issues outside of the public eye, where we have to choose our words very carefully sometimes. So I think there are some benefits that we don't want to overlook as we talk about this change.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and Councilman Boyette brought this up before the meeting to me too, and it's something that I had not necessarily considered. I always envision this, whether it be 8 councilmen and a mayor having 8 wards, but having 1 person per ward, and I can appreciate that perspective about having a representative on these committees from each ward and in each ward being represented in those discussions. Councilman Boyette's suggestion, not to steal his thunder necessarily, is to say, hey, let's create 3 wards then. If 6 is the number, let's create 3 wards, a Heights ward, a Midtown ward, and a West End ward. And there's 2 members from each ward. Still achieves the same thing that you're talking about with a smaller number. I think there are ways to do this and to set it up functionally and structurally if we contemplate less members. I'm not hung up on 1 member per ward. I'm really looking for a smaller, more cohesive, and more nimble group to try to work with. That's what I'm looking for the future of the city, whether it's me sitting in this seat or somebody else sitting in this seat 10 or 12 years down the line. How do we set future council members up to be successful at building those relationships to effectively lead the city? That's what I'm looking for. So I'm open to all of those suggestions or considerations, really just driving towards a smaller number to be more effective.
Other discussion. I find this discussion fascinating. I wish they'd had it 50 years ago when they came up with the 10+1 formula, because I think it probably would have, to Councilman Rips's point, if we'd had 6 back then, we wouldn't be having this discussion. I made a little list of costs and benefits here. And I think the benefits of a smaller entity are probably outweigh the costs. Benefits being the efficiency, the relationship building Councilman Rasmussen talked about. I agree with his analysis. Shorter meetings, just because you have fewer people talking, is helpful because it allows you to attract more people who have less time building those relationships. I think those are all perfectly legitimate benefits. On the cost side, appreciate Councilman Rips's analysis. We wouldn't be able to have that even distribution across in committees. We wouldn't have the detailed discussion that comes when you have a lot of people asking a lot of questions. There's cost to that, but there's also benefits to that. We would have less time, which is a benefit, or I'm sorry, we would all have to commit more time with a smaller number. We think we commit a lot of time now. Well, if there's less of us, there's fewer people to distribute, to answer those emails, to answer those phone calls, to go to those committee meetings. If you have a temporary physical problem or something, you need to step back for a season, you've got somebody else from your ward, that makes it easier. So those are real costs. So I think whatever the answer is, we need to know there is no perfect answer. There's no panacea here. There may be one formula that works to the better. Personally, if we had been back 50 years ago, I think I would have liked the smaller council, if only because there's strength in numbers, and that's how most other cities have smaller councils, and they seem to get by just fine. Nobody's really talking about increasing the number of their council, that, as far as I know of, but we are talking about reducing ours. The biggest problem I have is just the pace of making this very important decision without a lot of council or without a lot of community input and time to think it through, because we are on a clock, at least if the goal is to get something on the November ballot. And these are big choices. And I'm pretty confident we don't have the time to give it all that it deserves. Doesn't mean we don't have to pull the trigger and just see what shakes out. Ultimately, it's up to the voters. If they want more time, they can say no and come back and do it later. Or if it's overwhelming, it seems totally common sense to them, well, then they get the choice. It's a lot easier to just put something on the ballot than to actually have to make that ultimate choice. And if that's the majority of the council, I desire to have moved to a smaller number. I'm good with that in principle. But there are a lot of devils in the details here that I think we would have to work through. Important issues about how the mechanics of that would work, and that might shift away from messing with the status quo. I'm kind of a conservative guy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and I'm not absolutely convinced it's broke. In fact, I think it's really important that we, back to the 5 couples, it's amazing what a good job this organization does about deciding where to go for dinner. I mean, given the number of people, it's amazing. You know, in my opinion, my humble opinion, I don't see us as dysfunctional. I see us as getting a lot done, hundreds of decisions in an amazingly efficient manner, despite the challenges of number, which I do agree are very real. So anyway, those are just thoughts. Councilmember Rowan?
Thanks, Mayor. I would echo, this has really been an interesting conversation. I actually came in here pretty bullheaded about 1 member, 1 ward, but you've made a pretty eloquent defense, Tom, of 2 members per ward. That's interesting, I think. I hadn't thought about that. I think I don't mind a conversation about a smaller number, although the number does matter to me, as Scott has indicated. I think we have to balance this conversation that we're having here tonight. We're having a conversation about how we work with each other, which is really important. But there's another conversation, which is about how we work with the public. The mayor spreads us out among a number of boards and commissions where we make sure a public voice is heard in decision-making all over the city. We go to lots of task forces and all sorts of meetings. There is an obligation, and I do, as Scott mentioned, I worry about representation. I worry about dividing the city up into thirds. I think presents mathematical challenges, right? And maybe it's, dividing it up into 4 or something. I think we need to contemplate how we ensure the voices of a very diverse committee are heard. It's true that there are lots of cities that have smaller councils, but they are generally smaller cities, right? About 76% of incorporated municipalities have less than 50,000 people, or double that, right? So there aren't that many incorporated municipalities that are 100,000 or more. And so I think those statistics can be misleading when we think about, is this size too big? I think some of the issues that have been brought up tonight about efficiencies are valid, but I think there's alternative solutions other than reducing the representation. And again, I don't mind a conversation about some reduction. I do think 6 is too extreme. I think this is what 6 would look like, right? This is 6 and a mayor, and we're here for 3 hours. So I'm not convinced that this inherently leads to a faster meeting or a quicker meeting, nor necessarily should it. to the point that I think Councilmember Rupsis has made about really this being a deliberative process. I don't disagree that the strategic plan has been, I think, something Chris has tried so valiantly for so many years to make work, and it continues to be open to trying to find new ways. I generally am unpersuaded that a legislative body is ever going to develop a strategic plan, right? I mean, I just don't know that that will happen. But there are other ways to solve that process rather than debating ad nauseum about wordsmithing. We could just vote. If you have an amendment to the language, bring it up, we vote, we move on, right? I mean, there are things we can do to make meetings more efficient if that's the concern. We could have weekly business meetings if the concern is that these nights go too long. I mean, there are other ways to tackle this. And I think I want to hear from the public their thoughts. What I have heard so far is a lot of concern. Concern that the Heights would be under the sort of math of the city, the Heights would be given one voice. I think there's concerns that the public would be cut out of the process if council becomes insular. And of course, they have a vote, right? People can offset this. But I think we have to balance the importance of the group of council members, whoever they are, us or whoever's in the future, against the public interest as well. How we interact with the public, how we engage with the public, how we represent the public, how we show up and be present, especially since this is no one's full-time job. So I would just ask that we kind of weigh those two things in tandem, not just us and how we work together, but how we work with the public who has given us the privilege of being here.
Mike.
I'll try to be brief. So for the last 6 years, I've been thinking, do I want 11 husbands? Do I want 11 wives? Oh no, that's way too many, and it's really bad, and da 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 da. So, but then when I sit back and forget about me, I really don't think, I don't want one person per ward. I think, and you and the mayor and I, we talked, what happens if we get a real dud in there? Then there is no representation for that ward. Now there's at least 2 people, so the chances are we'll get 1 good, even if there's a dud, but there's hopefully 2 and good. So I said, well, I came up, well, let's have the Heights when I was a deputy sheriff, we went to the Heights. We didn't go to Lake Elmo and Maine, and then that was the Heights. The Heights was the Heights. And then the West End's the West End, and downtown is downtown, whether it be the south side, north side. So I said, well, how about 3 wards with 2 people each? So I guess forgetting myself and the pain I've always been about not having too many people, I still think each ward should have 2 people. That's my bottom line. And to be brief, the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. So if it's not broke, yeah, I think there's ways we can make this work better. Sometimes that gavel should come down a little sooner. Maybe that would make things work faster. But enough said.
Others? You're reaching for your mic, TJ?
And I'll be brief as well. I mean, I guess that would be my main consideration or concern is that people, I've heard a lot of my constituents express frustration just in general of trying to get a hold of council members and things and our availability for people to listen to them and have them feel heard. And I think Councilmember Owen kind of referred to that as far as our communication with the community. No matter what we do, we need to get better at that. We need to be responding to every email. We need to put some policies in, self-policing somehow that people are responded to, that they know when they reach out to us, they're gonna hear something. And it is hard to be able to go to every task force meeting and to the committee meetings and all of the things and having a job, but that's our role here. And so spreading that out a little more thinly concerns me. That all being said, on the negative, I can see some real positives to that. I 100% agree with what Councilmember Aspenleiter's talking about with our relationships and just the unwieldiness of, 10 other people to try to understand and understand your perspective, where you're coming from and things like that. So it's a big decision. I would be very interested what the public thought.
Yeah, so Of course, you know, I already spoke kind of what I thought about this before, but I will mention that I did try to research. I wish I could have found the original reason why they chose 10 when they started this charter. I looked for some notes on that, couldn't find it. There's probably something out there that would be interesting to find out why they chose 10, because there was 77,000, 60,000 people at that time. And they chose, 10 plus 1. And so they really wanted, the importance was representation, of people. And I think, we're all volunteers. We have a job, although I'm retired now, but we do have a job. You're retired. So, but for the most part, we juggle our lives to come here, to read the packets, to go to meetings, to, like say, foster relationships with not just us, but also city staff. I mean, it's not just 10 or 11 of us that we're fostering relationships. We're fostering it with all the staff. So there's a lot of relationships that we have to work hard at to try to balance. But I think the biggest thing that comes down to for me on this is not only the relationships here, but relationships with our constituents. Because there's so many times where I've talked to constituents who have already talked to Jennifer, or I maybe haven't talked to Jennifer and I get involved, or I'm not available. I know that Jennifer is going to take care of Ward 2 while I'm not there. I'm on vacation or whatever I'm doing. And so those people know how to reach out, and they can reach out to us. If I'm gone, the ward's taken care of. If she's gone, the ward's taken care of. We are all taking care of it. Even if it's not within my ward, I know I'm going to help the resident. But the idea is we're representing our wards. And the other thing that really, that I appreciate the larger number is, yes, I ask a lot of questions, but so do everyone else ask a lot of questions. And they bring in expertise that I don't have. And when they ask those questions, they spark those additional questions. They say, why? Well, what is going on here? Why is the city doing this? And helping us, not just us understand it, but it's more important that the public understands what we're doing, so that when we approve something, they have our trust. And we're here to earn that trust every single meeting to make sure that we're doing what the public wants. And I think that when we were taking something like this way, where they're perceiving, as I've heard from the public, is saying they're taking their representation away by reducing the council. That to me is concerning, because we have a lot of serious issues we have to address in the future with our mill levy change with the state, that I think we need to do everything we can to maintain that trust in the public. And so this is great to have a conversation about this. And I appreciate a lot of the comments tonight, both from you, Scott, and everyone. But my opinion is I think we need to really, as has been said here, is continue on with what we've got. And let's address some more serious issues within the charter that we have to address with the way the state has changed the mill levies, and look at something like that. And so that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Good. Anybody not say what they wanted to say? A question on the technicalities, Gina. We've got 2 ordinances and a resolution in the packet. Appreciate your efforts. And Councilor Aswell, we want to come back to this. But just so I understand the process, we would need the ordinance and the resolution for either, but we only had the resolution for the 5+1 at large. But that's the process. We need the ordinance and we need a resolution that describes exactly what's in the ballot.
That's correct. The proposed resolution that I've included is, the red language would be what you would take the red language out if you just wanted to have the 6 wards, if you wanted to have 6 wards too per ward.
Okay.
There may be a couple tweaks that need to be made, but
Otherwise, it'd
generally,
be basically the same.
yeah.
Very close to
Yep.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, and I appreciate the perspective from everybody here. I think we also need to be honest about past councils, our council, and future councils. Any board that you've ever been on, 50% of the board does 90% of the work. And that's not ever going to change. To get hung up that we need more numbers to spread the workload over. I mean, I think we also need to self-reflect on, does that even really happen in our current form? I mean, I would question that. I mean, some members are going to be far more active on different issues that are important to them. I mean, I got on this council for some very specific issues that were motivators and drivers for me, much like probably most of you did. We're going to be engaged at different levels, and we're always going to have members on this council and future councils going forward for this city that are going to be very engaged and put in way more time than they ever anticipated when they got elected. And you're going to have a lot of council members that don't. And that's okay too, but that's incumbent upon the electorate to select the right people. I think making this something that's attractive to people to get engaged with and involved with is also something to consider. I mean, I thought Dan Brooks did a damn good job in his email out today, talking about the comments that he's heard from the business community. And it's very similar to the comments that I've heard. As I've talked about this over the last 2 weeks, I've not had one person, not one, from the business community or from my ward say, oh, I think this is a really bad idea. I think eliminating representation is very concerning to me. Every one of them, particularly from people in the business community and drivers in our community, look at what we have as cumbersome and inefficient, and something that is not necessarily motivating or attractive to get involved in because it's so unwieldy. I think setting the city up for success in the future by making this, giving this the best shot to be successful with fewer numbers and fewer relationships is also something we need to consider. But I'd ask you to just be honest also about how active and engaged. It's too altruistic to think that 11 people are going to come in and everybody's going to give 110% for 4 years. It just does not happen. It never happens on any board that I've ever been involved in, and it's unrealistic to expect that that's going to happen. The voters will ultimately decide. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to let the voters decide what they think. Us unilaterally making that decision to say, nah, we're not going to give you that opportunity to say, hey, is this too many? What does it hurt for us to ask the voters at this stage of the game? It doesn't hurt anything. If they say no, hey, all right, away we go. But not giving them an opportunity to have a voice in that. This is a much easier question for them than doing a full charter review like we had and we do every 10 years. It's a much simpler question for them than cracking the door to the mill cap and the structure of our government and all of those things. It's a much more condensed and digestible discussion for the voters to say, hey, do we think that we need 11 of you? Or do we think that the city can get by with 7 of you or 9 of you? I think that's a perfectly appropriate question to put forward to the voters. If we did a multitude of work sessions and outreach to the community and meetings in the library, we'd get the same 20 people that show up to these meetings and give comment. It wouldn't be 50% of my ward showing up to give their comment and voice to this. It absolutely wouldn't. And so this is our opportunity to ask the voters. And I see absolutely no harm in asking them if this is right. I don't think huge, robust public engagement on something like this is really going to drive public engagement. I mean, it's a simple question to put on a ballot to ask. And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. And we continue forward. But I think we do our community a disservice by asking. And that's what I'm looking for. the blocking and the tackling associated with this and how we break up the wards and those types of things, I think we want to get close, but as we go through redistricting and those types of things, we'll figure that part out. And that will take, a much more engaged process. We'll have 2 years to work through that and to have those kind of discussions. Today and this month, the conversation, the discussion is just, it's around the number and putting it out to the people. So I'll leave it at that and ask us to move this forward. I'm open to the conversation of 8 and a mayor. I'm not thrilled about that. Jennifer and I talked about that. I still think 9 is too many. I think that doesn't get us far enough. I'm open to a conversation about a population trigger to go from 6 to 8 and a mayor. I'm open to a 3-ward, two council members per ward split to still have equal 2-person representation in 3 large wards. I think open to all of those conversations and discussions. But let's move this forward to a vote when the rest of our cohorts are here on the 28th and have these discussions with our constituents between now and then and come forward and vote and we either put it on or we don't.
Let's go this way. Chris, Tom, Jennifer. And we want to have an opportunity for the public, and then we also understand what it is that would come back on the 28th, because there's got to be some specificity there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my comments are just things to ask you to add to your discussion over the next few weeks if you choose to have it. So, public trust, how critical that is to governance and success. Decision making. The body has got to make decisions, ultimately. The relationships have been talked about. Accountability's not been mentioned, but is important. And the form of government. We have a council manager form of government. And so those relationships are not only between the council and the public and the council and each other, but the council and the administrator. It's a team. It's a collaborative system when functioning at its best. And just purely by coincidence, I think it's been, I've gotten to the pleasure of sitting in this seat in 4 cities. And those 4 cities have had 5, 7, 9, and 11 elected officials. There's not been a magic to it. But anyways, I just ask that the relationships think about who, long-term, future, and success, whoever's sitting in this seat that I'm in today, how important it is for the success of this organization long-term in the relationship between whoever you're empowering to sit in this seat and this policy body. So, thank you.
Keep moving this down, Tom.
So Chris brings up the point of the relationship between the council and the city manager, and I think that's of all the arguments, it's probably the one I'm most sympathetic to. Right? It's hard to understand this relationship, especially if you come into sitting in this seat where you think you are one of Chris's 11 bosses, as opposed to 1/11th of Chris's one boss. Right? And that different dynamic is if you come in here and you think that Chris is going to be responsive to me because I am a council member, Chris is responsible to council as a whole, not to any one of us individually. And so I imagine a lot of Chris's time trying to understand where council is as a whole is more difficult because we have 11 versus 7. And so I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. I would be totally open to if Chris said, instead of having monthly meetings with 10 or 11 of you, I'm going to have monthly meetings with 6 monthly meetings, 1 for each ward, and Mike and I can attend together. at a time that works for us, and mayor can have obviously his own meeting, but have ward level meetings. I think that would help Chris out probably a little bit. I'd be totally open to that. I'd be totally open to things like, we're not having discussion on consent agenda. If you've got questions, just email them in and we'll answer your questions. This is not Q&A time. If you want to separate something out, you separate it out to vote against it, not to, talk about it as nauseam, whatever. Right? Those kinds of changes, I think, can help us get through meetings, facilitate the relationship with the city manager, all those kinds of things. I think we can work through some of those things culturally to make ourselves more efficient. Getting back to the point that this just seems really rushed. It's not. I made a big stink last time talking about the Strong Mayor Initiative. That's a change to our form of government. And I was strongly against kind of push that through. I'm always open to, a conversation. Something like this was more manageable. I think though, once we get into the weeds, some of that blocking and tackling, it gets very complicated very easily. The math is kind of tricky in our community. The Heights is 25% of the city population. So if we have 3 wards, then you've got the Heights plus downtown Southside. Who's going to feel left out and underrepresented? And 2 big West End, right? That's just the geography of where we are. If we're 4, then the Heights have, 2 or their own representation. Then you've got the downtown and again, 2 West End. And again, my guess is this number of 10 probably came out of some of those iterations of how do we make the Heights feel valued, numerically on this council. And we had to get to that number until we kind of got these kind of dividing lines of how we make people feel like they have equal representation. So I think if we get to the conversation and we're still on point 1, and I think we should probably just have a vote and say, should we go to point 2? And then we can start talking about some of this kind of implementation or details. But there's a lot to figure out there. And it's not something that I think that we can just send staff off and then come back on the 28th and vote on this. It's at least another work session. And to me, feels like even more than that. So it's starting to feel more rushed. I'm not, looking to shut the conversation down, but I do think we should probably just get a sense on whether or not we should move to part 2 here pretty quickly.
Just a couple of things. I'm not sure where this falls in part 2, but I generally disfavor the idea of some wards 1 at large. So I don't know if there's a chance to take that off the table, but I generally don't like that strategy. And if that's point 2, then I'll shut up about it. But I think I intended to say almost everything that Tom just said. I am concerned, and I don't mean this critically at all, but I'm concerned that I'm already hearing language of we don't need to talk to the public about this. We don't need a public education about this. But we do, because the way the math plays out makes a difference. So in generic terms, do people want a smaller council? Maybe. I have had people call and express concern about it, but I'm looking here at this awesome little thing done by Big Sky Economic Development. The Heights is 33,000 people. The math matters, right? Are we carving 1,500 people out of the north side or the south side into the Heights? And do they feel represented? Are we carving 5,000 or 6,000 out? The blocking and tackling actually could influence how people feel about it. And I do think that needs some discussion and consideration so that the public understands the question being presented to them, because the reality of how it plays out could make a real difference. And I think Tom had mentioned, and I would reiterate as well, there might be some other ways to solve some of these problems. I'm not opposed to a slightly smaller council, but I think we have some other strategies we should talk about too. So I understand the desire not to get bogged down in the blocking and tackling, but I think my concern is hearing already that we are not going to do a big public education campaign. We're not going to talk to the public. That's what I don't want to see happen. I don't want to see us lean so hard into the idea of efficiency that we lose the public input. And I'm sure that's not what you meant, but the language caught my attention. And I just wanted to say that, this is how the public's voice happens. And I do think there should be a large public outreach and education conversation about it, because I have had concerns come to me.
Let's hear from the public, if the public is still with us this evening. Thank you for your patience. If anybody wanted to comment on this item, but if you do, please come forward, Amy.
Hi, Amy Aguirre again. And as you know, I'm a candidate for Ward 3, and I've conducted a very informal poll among people I know and people I don't know, just their general sense and feeling about this move. And the overwhelming majority were against it. So that's just my neighbor to neighbor conversations that I'm learning that I'm still open to conversation. Personally, I haven't made up my mind about anything about this yet, but what I will say is that Councilmember Aspenleiter's comment, it's a simple question. I disagree with that because it is a very loaded question. In words, it might be simple, but in depth, it is very profound in that if we were to shrink the size of council, we'd have less representation of our very diverse community, in my mind. As a person of color, when I come to council to give my opinion on something, I'm looking at every single one of you does not belong to the BIPOC community, at least in any visible way. Okay. So as a member of that community, it's hard enough to put myself in front and want to be a part of this conversation. So to have fewer representatives at the table makes it even more hard for someone in the BIPOC community to even want to consider putting themselves out there. But our community is far more diverse than you might realize, but I don't see that representation here. So that's my first concern. And I'm 100% behind Councilmember Owen's comment about public education. I think that is so critical to have that conversation with our community members in some form of an education campaign. And that means social media, that means maybe commercials or newspapers or whatever, to bring people into the conversation. And so that we can truly and fully take those ideas and create policy to reflect that. My other comment, let me see. Oh, I want to comment on how beautiful this dialogue has been tonight. And I've been to a number of council meetings where it's not as constructive or respectful even. And I just want to say that it's been beautiful witnessing this. And I really appreciate the heartfelt comments and perspectives. And again, back to Councilmember Aspenleiter, when you say you hate, those are your words, going into council retreats, and that hurts because retreats are intended to bring you closer, intended to give you that opportunity to be intentional and candid and personal. And if that's not happening, that's really unfortunate because that's a really missed opportunity for council. But what I've seen here tonight is your ability to connect. And that's what I've been hearing is that there has been a disconnect. But I see that connect here tonight. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other public comment on item number 5. Is there any other public comment on item number 5? Before we close the public comment period. No one is coming forward, so we will close the public comment period on number 5. It's getting late. I think we all want to wrap up here. Mr. Aspenleiter, I don't know if you want to help us decide how to move forward here, or any other council members, or if there are motions. What's our default? Is there going to be a second work session? Do we have something for a vote? If so, what would that be? Didn't we need to decide the 5+1 versus the 6 at a minimum, those sorts of things? Councilmember Aspenleiter.
Sure. And I guess what I would ask tonight is we're 4 down, right? Tonight. We're scheduled already to go back up in 2 weeks on the next work session. Let's get the other council members in the room and summarize. We don't need to replow the same ground. Let's summarize these conversations. Let's talk amongst ourselves in the meantime, along with talking to our constituents, and come back on the 21st and put this up or put it down on the agenda for the 28th. It's tentatively scheduled for the 28th. That's what my initiative did, was put it up for a vote. I want to see this voted up or down. At the end of the day, I want us to vote up or down on this on the 28th. That's what I'm asking. That's what my initiative asked for. And then we go from there. I don't think voting it up or down tonight in a work session with 4 members gone is the appropriate thing to do. So let's continue the conversation in an abbreviated fashion for the 21st, and then put it for an up or down vote on the 28th. And in that time, I would ask us to talk amongst each other, talk with our constituents, and see if we can come to a middle ground or not, and then vote. I don't think we need to belabor it more than that, and go forward.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, is there anything that you're asking staff to do between now and July 21st? Maybe Gina wants to have a discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Just keep in mind, if you would like this to be heard on the 28th, that will require the legal notice to go out, which needs to be done twice. So we could run it on the 18th and the 25th, or we could run it on the 11th and the 18th, but we need to have the specific language for, we need to know what ordinance you would want to be voting on. So.
Councilor Absler? Scott?
So Gina, to that public notice process, can we put, the 3 concepts that have been laid out by various members up and say, we're going to decide one of these 3 or nothing on the 28th to cover all of the ground. We put out we're going to consider an ordinance that is 3 wards, 2 representatives per ward for 6 plus 1. We're going to consider an ordinance that says 6 wards, 1 member per ward. We're going to consider 8 wards, 1 member per ward for 9, or nothing. I mean, I want to make sure that we're covering all the legal grounds so that we don't get, tripped up in public notice about what we eventually decide to do. Can we notice it that way, just so that we cover the bases?
We could put 3 ordinances. We could put 3 public hearings, first reading ordinance on your agenda for the 28th, and we would need to run ads for the 3 different ordinances. We could do that, or however many options you wanted to consider.
We haven't even talked about the ordinances. We've talked about one thing, how many council members, we each want. Now we're talking about trying to rush the process forward to have staff move forward with 3 ordinances that we haven't even looked at or discussed. So I'm feeling like this is being rushed because, again, someone's counted votes because they know on the 11th there's going to be enough votes to pass this going forward. So it is concerning to me that whether it's 6 or 11, we're going to have this type of thing. I'm really concerned that we're going to. I mean, why not put on, let's say my idea is to have 12 members. And so then is Gina going to publish a option to have 12-member ordinance out there? I mean, I think we have to discuss this first and decide as a council what we're going to put to the public. This is not, I think someone said it's half baked. I think this is still, it was about the other item. It was still, this is not even fully baked. I don't even think it's in the pan yet. And we're trying to get it in the oven.
I think that's making it wildly overcomplicated. I mean, the ordinance language is a 3-word change. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say the ordinance is overly complicated. I mean, for crying out loud, this is a 3-word change. Now, we can discuss the merits of the number, but trying to say that the ordinance is so complicated that we got to spend time talking about it, I think that's ridiculous. It's not that hard. The ordinance language is easy. The conversation really is what we had tonight. It's about the number. It's not good. I mean, Gina, correct me if I'm wrong, to change that ordinance that you sent out, that's a 10-minute exercise to make it say 3 wards, 2 members per ward, to make it say 8 wards, 1 member per ward. I mean, those are word changes that take 5 minutes.
I think that's mostly true, just depending on what, I mean, obviously, if you keep it 2 council members per ward, that's one less change that needs to be made to the charter. So that's even easier. It's just a reduction of the number. So that's a very simple change.
Mayor.
Jennifer.
Gina, I don't mean to freelance as a lawyer here. So I am unaware that we are required to publish in public notice every single possible alternative that council could come up with. Could we not just publish Councilmember Aspenleiter's initiative and say the council may consider alternatives, including, a different number or a different council makeup? I mean,
We generally just, okay, so maybe my communication is lacking here, but so our practice is always when we have a proposed ordinance that requires 2 publications, not less than 12 days apart, I think is what it is. Denise is nodding over there. So we could have, I guess I would be slightly concerned, would want to think about if we just publish 1 legal notice, which would be published twice for the issue of reduction of city council size, that would cover it generally, but you have 3 different proposals. So to give the best notice, we generally provide some detail in our legal ads. So we generally would put more specific information about reduction of.
I get that as practice.
Yeah.
Is it required?
It is required.
It's required to publish every possible alternative?
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's
no,
what I meant.
It is not.
Because I
No.
understand the idea of wanting to disclose more rather than less. I'm for that. But I think to Councilmember Neese's point, there could be multiple iterations that come out. These are not yet ready to be up or down votes. Councilmember Aspenleiter has agreed we need another work session. Couldn't we just say, this is the initiative he has brought forward, council may consider alternatives? Please come, and please come to the work session.
For the 21st.
Correct. I'm talking about publishing on the 11th and the 25th, right, of July. That's what you're saying? You need to publish on those 2 days, right?
We would have to publish, we can publish on the 11th and 18th. We just have to publish 12th or twice.
With how many days between?
I think it's a minimum of
Is it-
10. Is my
So it would have to be the
Is it-
11th and 25th, right?
There's a minimum of, you can't just do it back to back 2
I can
days in a
find it.
row. There's a
Yeah.
statute, there's a not less than and a not more than guidance, my recollection.
Right. I think we generally do it 2 Fridays in a row. So the 12 days was wrong. That was the hearings need to be not less than 12 days apart.
I see. Okay. All
So-
I'm saying is I think we should do as much as possible, let the public know that other alternatives will be discussed, but that this is the initiative that has been put forward. That would seem to solve the timing issue.
Okay. So this is perhaps what I'm not communicating very well.
Sorry.
On the 28th, you would have a public hearing and first reading on an ordinance.
Correct. Which
So
would be 6
that-
members.
So we don't have to publish a legal advertisement for a work session to talk about the initiative. We wouldn't be doing that. So I'm just talking about getting the legal ad in for the 28th for you guys all to take action on that.
I'm with you.
I'm wondering if I could
I'm not with you,
if
I
I
guess.
ask it if I make the situation worse, which typically happens, but that's not what I'm trying to do. What I've seen over the years is if an ordinance can get amended on adoption night, right, for first reading, the question ends up becoming, is the amendment so significant that legal counsel has advised a 3rd reading? That's what this happened to me a few times over the past 25 years. But amendments that are not considered overly substantive are made, and then the second reading, it's included, and that's always been a legal, what I've experienced is a legal judgment as to whether those amendments that night go too far and thus require an additional.
And just to be clear, in this case, we don't have the luxury of a third reading,
Right.
correct?
That's
So
correct.
we have to get it right, legally right. And to Jennifer's point, how much flexibility, because we want the public to have as detailed as possible. The danger of detail is that it says, this is what's going to be discussed and nothing else. And obviously that's not the case here. So if we have detailed, great, and we do have an initiative with a specific proposal, but to her point, and I agree with it, we got to have a really big catch-all that says we might go in a different direction on this general topic. And can that be
And that's why
accomplished?
you ask about the alternatives, and you don't necessarily have to provide all those alternatives, but like Chris was mentioning, if it is substantive, then I would generally recommend that you go to a third reading. So if we publish a notice that says council's going to consider reducing from 10 to 6, and then you go 10 to 8, and it wasn't published that way, I feel like that is a substantive change, that there should be a third reading.
What if you said, and then Councilmember Ripsis, the proposal is 6, discussion has occurred about just changing that number, changing the number of council members per ward. So you define the potential issues by their general nature. The whole idea being to the public, if you care about this, you need to be at the meeting, because that's what we're trying to accomplish, right? Let people know so they're not surprised. That'd be my recommendation. Be specific about the topics,
Yeah.
if that's the direction we want to go. But Councilmember Ripsis, you wanted to weigh in on all this.
Mayor, I think if Councilmember Assenleiter really wants to push this to have the first reading on the 28th, we got to stay here tonight and have part 2 of the conversation. We can't push part 2 to a work session 2 weeks from now. Numbers or not, I think we've got to have that conversation and do it like we have been doing, as was pointed out. I think we're having a great conversation, and I'm willing to stay here and continue it. But I think we've got to get to the point where we understand what the preferred solution for the actual ordinance is tonight in order to give it proper notice. And if we're not willing to sit here tonight and hash it out and move forward, then maybe we just need to set up a process that says, by end of year, we're going to have this stuff figured out. We're going to take it to the operations committee or whatever and come up with a list of, these are the changes that we want to see happen, put in front of the voters in the May timeframe or whatever, when we have to go out for levy changes or whatever, when we can all do it as a part of a big public campaign. But we don't have anybody here tonight saying this is how our public education effort is going to be led. We have got no group running up and saying, hey, we believe in this. We think this should go forward and we're behind it. And so we will help get the word out. We've had that for every single ballot issue I can remember over the last 10 or 15 years. And certainly the ones that have been successful have had those done better than others. So if we're going to move forward, we got to move forward tonight and get ready to sit down for a while, in my opinion.
Mike.
So I guess Councilmember Aspenleiter, we're going to probably have a vote in May of next year for the budget. Would you be opposed to having time between now and then to hash this out and then put it on the ballot then? Just options.
If we can agree that we can put this on a May ballot and still implement it in the 2027 election, 18 months from that point, then I would consider that for further discussion and furthering advancing this ball down the field. What I don't want is to again let this let something like this also drag and say, okay, well, now that because it's on a May ballot, now it's going to be 2029's election, and drag it out from an implementation standpoint to a place where, by the time the voters propose to initiate it, now, 4 years later is when it gets implemented. If we can do that in a way that by 2027, by the municipal election in 2027, we're moving that forward if the voters approve it, then I would be okay continuing this conversation and moving the ball down the field.
So I just need to interject. Statute does require that a local government election must be held on the same day as the primary election established by law or the general election established by law. That's not one that you could call as a special election, unfortunately. It would be, it would be the next 2027. I mean, if you didn't do it this odd calendar year, this is,
We can't put a charter amendment on an even year ballot?
we are having some disagreement about that. The elections office has advised that they don't believe that that is, so state statute says you can have a special election if it's for funding, but their interpretation of the statute is that a charter amendment is not about funding. A charter amendment is a charter amendment.
Okay, but that's for a special election. There will be
That's for a special
federal
election,
June
yes.
primary.
There will be a,
On that federal June primary?
The federal election cycle. So we have no election next year, but the feds do.
Correct.
yeah, but that's not,
Doesn't
that's,
fit
that
that.
doesn't fit the statute. The statute requires
Put it on a federal ballot.
our local, our local elections have to be held on the odd number years. The primary that we have scheduled for our odd numbered years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
it's 13-1-405.
I know I'm jumping to the merits a little bit of these different options, but it does go to the issue of notice. I don't see any of the other options as quickly getting a solid majority. The larger number of 8, I agree with Councilman Asplund, just as much of a difference. I think it would fail, and it just wouldn't accomplish what's intended. The smaller end of the spectrum, the 3, is such a radical change from where people are at. I think it would fail because people would say that's just a radical change, and they care more about their ward than how many people are in representing them as council members. So that leaves us with the 5 or 6, if that's correct. And there was some real pushback to the 1 at-large member and keeping the existing 5, and I kind of understand that because it's kind of weird to have one person who is kind of super person, whatever. You like that? Okay, well, but it might be good. I personally like at-large, but I like a mix. Kind of like you see more of kind of 50-50. But that's not on the table, so that may just leave us with what's closest to the existing, which is just the 6, which is what Councilor Abschlander was proposing. That's how I think it would probably shake out for what it's worth on six wards, yeah. And then doing some redistricting in a fairly modest way. You'd have to get rid of roughly 1/6 of the size of each ward, right, to create the 6th ward.
So to Tom's initial
back
question.
on the timing, we're stuck with we've got to do it now. So was that the bottom line to all that discussion?
because of
Not at all.
it being a charter piece.
For 2 years.
Whereas the budget piece, you have more time. I mean, there's no magic to May. The magic to the budget issue we will find next year is really unrelated, and as long as it's by the primary. If you remember, we did the first repeal and replace public safety levy in September, and it met the deadline to start collecting that tax in the fall. So the financial piece really is disconnected from this, and the statute clearly treats them differently.
And just to be clear, that when you say local elections, it means the city can't piggyback on the school district's election. Those are completely separate and can't be considered local, both local.
I'm actually not familiar with the school district election cycle, but it's completely different.
Gina, this is such a critical issue, the timing. Maybe when we break up tonight, unless magically everything becomes clear, you could send us a paragraph, especially for the benefit of the other 4 council members, kind of running us through this. I think that would be helpful. Councilor Asplander, or? Oh, I apologize. Yeah, Dan has been listening, so. Dan, you're the one who hasn't said anything. You want to say anything?
No, I see both points, and I think ultimately it's going to go to the citizens. So I'll push it all the way there. I don't know that I would vote on it. Or vote yes on reducing it to 6, but I have no problem with it going out to the public.
Okay. So where are we at? We have to proceed now based on what Gina said?
Because that first
We
reading
either
is this Friday.
Say yes or say no to this?
So am I thinking of it right, Gina? The first reading being this Friday means that, or the first notice. I'm sorry, not first reading, notice, because the other, but that's before Monday where we could add this to the agenda for Monday night. But that's after we need to have that first notice.
Yeah, I mean, you could also add this agenda item to your regular business meeting next week.
Well, that's what I.
Oh, that's
thinking,
what you
but
just
the
said.
notice would happen before on Friday.
If you are just, so no, we could do a notice on the 18th and the 25th.
Oh, okay.
For the first reading and for public hearing and first reading for the ordinance. That could be done. So you could still have this, if you wanted to have this discussion on your regular business meeting next week, as a special
Yeah, we can add a work session before or after the regular meeting next week to have a week to think about this, talk about it, and conclude that night which way you want to go.
And so that was where I was going to go. I mean, if I'm not interested in kicking this 2 years down the road. I mean, if that's the way that the vote goes, I'll most certainly be bringing this back to get it on some kind of ballot. I think that's a good continuation step to continue this conversation to next Monday, to add a work session on the back end of our regular business session when everybody is here. And we have them participate in this conversation and discussion as well. I would certainly support that and ask for that consideration. But I have a hard time making this decision unilaterally with 4 gone, or not sitting in the same room as this.
Then a motion to direct staff to have this on the next work session would be appropriate if you want to make that.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'd move to add a work session to our July 14th regular business meeting at the end, and move this forward.
Okay, motion is to add it to our next work session on July 21st.
No. It's to add a work session to the end of our regular business session on the 14th.
At regular business. Right. Second by Councilmember Rogers. Discussion then on that agenda item. Councilmember Boyette.
Yeah, regardless of which way I'm going to vote, I think we need to have the full council, and I want to encourage everyone to make sure everyone else shows up. call the other 3 or 4 people and say, please show up.
Okay, further discussion? Chris, you want
Thinking
to weigh
of,
in?
thinking of decision-making, is after the meeting the best time to have this important discussion? Or is it before the meeting to have an important discussion? Would you
What-
want to do?
Can you give us any sort of forecast of what that
Well,
agenda
the
looks
agenda's not, the agenda actually isn't bad, but that doesn't seem to be
like?
matter as to how long meetings are. I mean, there's only 4 action items and they're not that intensive. Probably the most intensive one is there's a TIF application for downtown, but they're pretty straightforward. So I just,
We would, to answer your question, we would be fresher, but we would also make the public have to endure some indefinite discussion. So I'm okay with it being at the end, but I appreciate the freshness issue. But other council may think otherwise. Okay, are we ready just to vote on that, whether to add this to next week's agenda? If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay.
Nay.
Voting opposition, Council Members Ripsis and Neese. All of the council members voting in favor. Councilmember Tidswell, I assume you voted in favor of the motion, is that correct?
I'm a nay.
You were a nay. Okay, so the motion still
I'm a nay.
passes, though, 4-3. Councilmembers Owen, Rogers, Boyette, Cole voting in favor. Councilmembers Ripsis, Neese, and Tidswell against. So this will be on our agenda for next week. And I agree with whoever said, let's make sure people are actually there. That's important. So, okay. Thank you for, I agree with Amy's observation. This was a beautiful discussion, was I think our word, respectful, and on very important things. So important issues, and thank you, Councilor Abslider, for bringing them forward. That is that item. Council items or agenda items coming up. Chris, anything besides what we've already covered?
no.
Okay. Council discussion. I said at the beginning of this meeting, whenever that started, that because of the item or what happened in Texas, that I think it would be timely if we asked our DES coordinator just to come and say hello and maybe give us an opportunity to chat about especially notification issues. Chris, you have anything on that?
No, definitely good idea. We'll work with Derek to get that scheduled. And I think one of those significant challenges is Everbridge. It's the technology. It's what do you use on the notification side? And if you'll recall, we moved from Code Red to Everbridge. I can't gauge any level of more or less success other than I did catch some media from the city manager down in Texas that the notification system is part of the challenge in all this. And I did catch some public comment that they got their notice a few hours after the event. So, I mean, we've moved away from sirens and to technology. It seems like it shouldn't be that hard to figure this out, but it's been a pretty serious challenge to get people to sign in. And so anyways, we'll ask Derek to come. He's very familiar with the community. As you recall, he was our 911 operator before this, and before that he was in the fire service in the area. So a very well qualified person.
Any objection to that suggestion or qualifications or suggestions? Okay. Okay. And then anything else in the way of council discussion? Any public comment on non-agenda items? Thank you all. We are adjourned.